Nobody notices your potential. They only notice your patterns. One of the harshest realities about human nature is that people rarely judge you based on what you are capable of becoming. They judge you based on what you repeatedly show them. Potential is invisible. Patterns are not. You may carry intelligence, creativity, ambition, or talent, powerful enough to completely transform your life. But if your daily behavior constantly reflects procrastination, inconsistency, fear, or excuses, that becomes the version of you the world accepts as real. This is why so many people secretly feel unseen. Deep inside, they believe they are meant for more, yet nobody around them treats them that way. Not because people are cruel, but because human beings trust repeated actions more than hidden intentions. A person who constantly delays their goals eventually gets viewed as someone unreliable. Someone who talks about discipline but never follows through slowly trains others to stop believing their words. What makes this truth deeply unsettling is that patterns silently build your identity over time while you barely notice it happening. Every abandoned project, every broken promise to yourself, every moment of avoidance becomes another piece of evidence about who you are. Eventually, people stop expecting greatness from you, even if you still secretly expect it from yourself. The frightening part is that your future reputation is often formed before your success ever arrives. People observe habits before results. They notice consistency before talent. And once someone memorizes your patterns, changing the way they see you becomes painfully difficult, because in their mind, your repeated behavior has already become your true character. The longer you avoid a hard conversation, the more control it gains over your life. Some conversations do not disappear just because you avoid them. They wait, quietly, patiently, growing heavier inside your mind every single day. A truth you never said, a betrayal you never confronted, a boundary you were too afraid to establish. At first, silence feels safer. You tell yourself you are protecting the relationship, avoiding drama, or waiting for the right time. But the longer you delay it, the more psychological control that conversation begins to have over your life. The human mind was never designed to peacefully carry unresolved tension. It keeps replaying it in the background like a haunting, unfinished scene. You begin imagining arguments that never happened, rehearsing speeches alone at night, and feeling anxiety rise whenever that person walks into the room or sends a message. What you avoided externally slowly starts consuming you internally. What makes this terrifying is that avoidance quietly changes your personality. You become more careful, more emotionally exhausted, more fake around certain people. You start filtering your words, suppressing emotions, and walking on invisible eggshells just to keep temporary peace alive. Over time, the fear of the conversation becomes bigger than the conversation itself. Meanwhile, resentment grows in silence. Distance deepens. Misunderstandings harden into permanent perceptions. And while you think you are avoiding pain, the unresolved issue is silently shaping your decisions, your mood, your confidence, and even your sleep. The disturbing truth is that many people lose years of emotional freedom simply because they were too afraid to say what needed to be said when it was still small enough to heal. Some people forgive you only after they no longer need you. One of the darkest truths about human relationships is that forgiveness is not always emotional maturity. Sometimes it is simply convenience. There are people who hold anger toward you for years, not because the pain was unbearable, but because your existence still had value to them. As long as they needed your attention, loyalty, support, money, validation, or emotional presence, resentment remained alive beneath the surface like a hidden weapon, waiting for the right moment. What makes this disturbing is how invisible it can feel while it is happening. Someone may smile at you, speak kindly to you, and continue keeping you close, while quietly storing every mistake you ever made. The relationship appears normal on the outside, but emotionally, they never truly released the wound. They simply postponed their reaction because losing access to you would have cost them something. Then one day, everything changes. They become distant, colder, strangely calm. Suddenly, they forgive what once seemed unforgettable. Not because healing finally happened, but because your usefulness expired. The emotional debt they held over you no longer serves a purpose. The control disappears once the need disappears. This reality leaves many people confused and heartbroken because they mistake dependence for connection. They believe loyalty existed when, in truth, attachment was often tied to benefit. Some people stay emotionally invested in your mistakes only while they still need something from you. The terrifying part is realizing that not everyone keeps people in their life out of love. Sometimes they keep them close because letting go too early would cost them more than pretending to forgive. You can spend years healing from words someone else forgot they said. One of the most unsettling truths about human psychology is that people often forget the damage they caused long before the person they hurt stops carrying it. A single sentence spoken in anger, humiliation, disappointment, or cruelty can stay alive inside someone's mind for years, replaying itself quietly in moments of insecurity, loneliness, or self-doubt. Meanwhile, the person who said it may barely remember the moment ever happened. What makes this so disturbing is how uneven emotional impact truly is. To one person, it was just words. To the other, it became part of their identity. A parent calling their child a failure during one painful argument. A teacher mocking someone in front of a classroom. A partner casually attacking someone's appearance, intelligence, or worth during a moment of frustration. These moments often last only seconds outwardly, but internally, they can echo for decades. The human mind especially remembers emotional pain tied to shame and rejection. Once certain words attach themselves to your self-image, they begin shaping how you see yourself without you fully realizing it. You start hesitating before speaking, doubting your abilities, hiding parts of your personality, or believing you are unworthy of love, success, or respect because someone planted that belief during a vulnerable moment. The terrifying part is that many people carry invisible emotional scars caused by conversations the other person completely forgot ever happened. Entire lives can slowly bend around sentences spoken carelessly by someone who moved on the next day, never realizing their words became a permanent voice inside another human being's head. Most people do not miss you. They miss what you did for them. One of the coldest realizations a person can experience is discovering that their absence does not hurt people because of who they were, but because of what they provided. Many relationships survive not on deep emotional connection, but on comfort, convenience, attention, validation, favors, emotional support, or stability. As long as you continue giving those things, people stay attached. The moment those benefits disappear, their love often changes faster than you expected. What makes this truth painful is how convincing false attachment can feel while you are inside it. Someone constantly calls you, texts you, wants your presence, and makes you feel important. But once you stop helping, stop chasing, stop fixing their problems, or stop being emotionally available every second, the energy suddenly shifts. The calls become rare. The concern fades. The effort disappears. It becomes painfully clear that your role mattered more than your existence. Human beings naturally become emotionally attached to people who make life easier for them. The person who listens during breakdowns, the person who pays the bills, the person who always forgives, the person who provides attention during loneliness. Over time, People can confuse dependence with genuine love without even realizing it themselves. The disturbing part is that many people only understand this after exhausting themselves trying to keep relationships alive. They mistake usefulness for connection and self-sacrifice for loyalty. Then one day they disappear, expecting people to miss their heart, only to realize most people simply miss the comfort, access, and emotional service they once provided so freely. A calm personality often comes from surviving chaos quietly. Some of the calmest people you will ever meet are not naturally peaceful. They became quiet because life exhausted them emotionally long before you met them. Beneath their controlled voice, patient attitude, and unreadable expression is often a history filled with chaos, disappointment, fear, conflict, or emotional survival that forced them to master self-control just to protect their own sanity. What makes this unsettling is that many people mistake calmness for weakness, simplicity, or innocence. They see someone who rarely reacts and assume they have never faced real pressure. In reality, truly calm people are often the ones who have already experienced emotional storms powerful enough to teach them how dangerous, uncontrolled emotions can become. They learned that panic solves nothing. Explaining yourself endlessly changes nothing. Reacting to every insult destroys peace faster than the insult itself. Over time, chaos trains certain people to become emotionally quieter. They stop raising their voice because they grew up surrounded by shouting. They stop seeking attention because they learned invisibility felt safer. They stop reacting quickly because experience taught them that impulsive emotions often create permanent damage. Their calmness is not always comfort. Sometimes it is survival disguised as maturity. The disturbing part is that people rarely notice how much pain hides behind emotional control. A person may laugh, remain patient, and appear emotionally stable while silently carrying years of anxiety, heartbreak, family dysfunction, betrayal, or loneliness that nobody ever saw. Many calm people are not calm because life treated them gently. They are calm because they learned the hard way what chaos does to the human mind when nobody comes to save you from it. The world rewards consistency more than talent. One of the hardest truths to accept is that raw talent alone rarely changes a person's life. The world is filled with gifted people who never became successful, respected, or fulfilled because talent without consistency slowly fades into wasted potential. Meanwhile, people with average ability but relentless discipline often rise far beyond those who were naturally gifted. This reality feels unfair until you realize that the world does not reward what you can do occasionally. It rewards what you can repeat consistently. What makes this truth painful is how seductive talent can feel in the beginning. Talented people often receive praise early in life without needing much effort. Things come easier to them, so they unconsciously depend on natural ability instead of building discipline. But eventually, life reaches a point where talent alone cannot carry someone anymore. The people who continue improving are usually the ones who learned how to work even when they felt tired, unmotivated, distracted, or emotionally drained. Consistency is terrifying because it exposes how much success is actually built through repetition rather than inspiration. Writing every day, practicing every day, improving every day, showing up when nobody is watching. Most people quit because the results feel invisible for a long time. Human beings crave immediate reward, but consistency often feels meaningless until years later when the gap suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. The disturbing part is that small daily habits quietly shape entire destinies, while people focus only on dramatic moments of motivation. In the end, many talented people become trapped inside regret, forced to watch less gifted but more disciplined individuals build the life they once believed would naturally belong to them. Many friendships end long before people stop talking. One of the saddest realities about human relationships is that friendships rarely die all at once. Most of them fade silently while both people continue pretending everything is normal. The conversations still happen, the messages still get answered, birthdays are still acknowledged, but emotionally, the connection already disappeared long ago. What remains is often habit, history, convenience, or fear of admitting the truth. What makes this painful is how slowly it happens. At first, the energy changes almost invisibly. The excitement fades. The effort becomes one-sided. Conversations feel forced instead of natural. You stop sharing meaningful parts of your life because something no longer feels emotionally safe or genuine. The laughter becomes shorter. The silences become heavier. Yet both people continue maintaining the surface of the friendship because ending it openly feels uncomfortable. Over time, the relationship transforms into a performance. You talk because you always talked. You respond because ignoring them would seem cruel. But deep down, both people often sense the emotional distance growing wider with every interaction. Sometimes resentment quietly replaces affection. Sometimes life simply pulls people into different identities, values, and priorities until the connection can no longer survive naturally. The terrifying part is that many people never realize the friendship already ended emotionally. They continue holding loyalty toward memories instead of reality. They keep mourning the way things used to feel, while ignoring what the relationship has actually become. Some friendships do not collapse through betrayal or conflict. They die through emotional starvation. And often, the hardest part is recognizing that the person still talking to you is no longer the same person who once truly knew you. The version of you that everyone loves may be the version destroying you. One of the most disturbing psychological traps in life is realizing that the version of yourself people praise the most is sometimes the version suffering silently behind the scenes. The overly available version. The endlessly patient version. The version that never says no, never complains, never disappoints anyone, and constantly sacrifices personal peace just to keep others comfortable. People often celebrate these traits because they benefit from them, not because they understand the damage they are causing you internally. What makes this so dangerous is how rewarding self-destruction can feel at first. The more you suppress your real emotions, the more easy to love you become. People admire your kindness, depend on your reliability, and praise your calmness without realizing those qualities may be fueled by fear, exhaustion, people-pleasing, or emotional neglect. You slowly become addicted to being needed because your worth starts depending on how useful and emotionally convenient you are to others. Over time, this creates a terrifying split between your public identity and your private reality. Outwardly, everyone loves you. Internally, you feel drained, unseen, resentful, and emotionally disconnected from yourself. You begin abandoning your own needs so often that you no longer recognize what you genuinely want anymore. The version everyone praises slowly becomes a mask you are afraid to remove. The frightening part is that people may resist your healing once you start changing. The moment you establish boundaries, prioritize yourself, or stop overextending your energy, some people suddenly call you selfish, distant, or different. Not because you became worse, but because the version of you they loved was quietly destroying itself to keep everyone else comfortable. Being needed and being valued are not the same thing. One of the most painful illusions in human relationships is believing that because someone needs you, they truly value you. At first, the difference feels invisible. They call you constantly, rely on your support, seek your advice, and make you feel important in their life. You begin to believe the connection is deep because your presence seems essential to them. But needing someone and genuinely valuing them are two completely different emotional realities. What makes this truth disturbing is how long people can confuse usefulness with love. Some relationships survive not because of emotional connection, but because one person provides stability, attention, money, emotional comfort, problem solving, or constant reassurance. The moment those needs disappear, the relationship often changes in ways that feel cold and shocking. Suddenly, the calls become less frequent. The effort fades. The emotional warmth disappears almost overnight. This happens because being needed is often conditional, while being valued is consistent. A person who only needs you is attached to what you provide. A person who truly values you cares about your existence even when you have nothing left to offer them. That difference becomes painfully clear during moments of weakness, failure, exhaustion, or personal struggle. The terrifying part is realizing how many people stay trapped in one-sided relationships because feeling needed gives them a false sense of importance. They sacrifice themselves endlessly, believing they are loved, while the connection quietly depends more on utility than genuine care. Some people panic when they are no longer useful because deep down, usefulness was the only thing keeping the relationship alive. Some people become kind only after life humiliates them. One of the darkest truths about human behavior is that some people do not develop empathy through wisdom, love, or emotional maturity. They develop it through suffering. As long as life keeps rewarding them, protecting them, or placing them above others, they often move through the world with arrogance, judgment, or cruelty without truly understanding the damage they cause. It is only when life finally breaks their certainty that they begin to understand pain from the other side. What makes this unsettling is how differently people behave before and after humiliation touches their life personally. Someone who once mocked weakness suddenly becomes gentle after experiencing failure. A person who judged others for depression becomes compassionate after facing emotional collapse themselves. Someone who laughed at financial struggles becomes softer after losing stability, status, or security. Pain forces perspective onto people who previously lacked it. Human beings often struggle to emotionally understand experiences they have never personally endured. Success can create emotional blindness. Privilege can create emotional distance. When someone has never been rejected, betrayed, abandoned, humiliated, or powerless, they sometimes mistake their luck for superiority. They believe struggling people simply made bad choices or lack discipline because they have never truly faced helplessness themselves. The terrifying part is that life has a way of humbling people eventually. Illness, failure, heartbreak, public embarrassment, loss, or loneliness can instantly destroy the illusion of invincibility. And when that happens, many people finally develop the kindness they once refused to give others. Some of the gentlest people you will ever meet are not naturally soft. They are people who once underestimated pain until life forced them to feel it personally. The older you get, the more expensive procrastination becomes. When people are young, procrastination often feels harmless. Delaying goals, wasting time, avoiding difficult decisions, or putting off responsibilities seems temporary because youth creates the illusion that there will always be more time later. Missing one opportunity does not feel dangerous when life still appears endless, but as the years pass, procrastination slowly changes from a bad habit into something far more terrifying. It becomes accumulated regret. What makes this reality so painful is that time quietly increases the price of every delay. The risks you avoided in your 20s become the opportunities you desperately wish you had taken in your 30s and 40s. The body you neglected becomes harder to repair. The dreams you postponed begin fading beneath bills, responsibilities, exhaustion, and fear. Suddenly, starting over no longer feels exciting. It feels overwhelming. The human mind is deeply skilled at convincing itself that tomorrow will be different. People delay difficult conversations, business ideas, creative ambitions, health goals, and emotional healing because temporary comfort feels safer than uncertainty. But procrastination is deceptive because the consequences arrive slowly enough for people to ignore them until years disappear. One of the most disturbing parts is realizing that life keeps moving even while you hesitate. Other people continue building skills, relationships, wealth, discipline, and confidence, while procrastination quietly keeps you emotionally frozen in place. Over time, the gap between who you are and who you could have been becomes painfully visible. The frightening truth is that procrastination does not merely steal time, it steals versions of your future that will never exist again once the window for becoming them quietly closes forever. You can lose years trying to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. One of the most emotionally exhausting experiences in life is trying to prove your intentions to someone who has already decided who you are. No matter how carefully you explain yourself, how honest you become, or how many times you revisit the situation, certain people are not listening to understand you. They are listening only to confirm the version of you they already created in their mind. What makes this so psychologically draining is that human beings naturally crave understanding. We want people to see our heart correctly. We want our motives, pain, and perspective to be recognized fairly. This is why many people spend years replaying arguments, sending long messages, defending themselves endlessly, or trying to fix misunderstandings that were never truly misunderstandings in the first place. Some people distort your words because it benefits their ego, their anger, or the narrative they need to maintain. Admitting they misunderstood you would require accountability, humility, or emotional maturity they may not possess. So instead, they hold on to the false version of you because it keeps them emotionally comfortable. Meanwhile, you slowly destroy your peace, trying to correct a perception they never intended to change. The terrifying part is how much life people waste inside this cycle. Entire years disappear chasing validation from individuals emotionally committed to seeing you negatively. Over time, your self-worth begins depending on convincing people who already closed their minds long ago. Eventually, one of the hardest lessons arrives. Not every misunderstanding can be repaired. Some people only understand you when they are finally ready to stop protecting the version of reality that makes them feel justified. The hardest workers are often the least celebrated. One of the cruelest realities about life is that effort and recognition rarely move together equally. Some of the hardest working people in the world live invisible lives. They wake up early, carry enormous responsibilities, sacrifice comfort, suppress exhaustion, and continue pushing forward while receiving little praise, attention, or appreciation from anyone around them. Meanwhile, others with louder personalities, better timing, or more visible positions often receive the credit the silent workers never see. What makes this truth emotionally painful is how deeply human beings crave acknowledgement. Most people can survive struggle far longer than they can survive feeling unseen. A person may spend years sacrificing for their family, their career, or their dreams, only to realize that nobody truly noticed how much they carried alone. The world often celebrates results while ignoring the suffering required to create them. Many hardworking people become emotionally quiet over time because they slowly understand that effort does not guarantee recognition. The employee who keeps everything functioning behind the scenes is often ignored until they disappear. The parent who sacrifices sleep, energy, and peace for their children rarely hears thank you. The loyal friend who constantly shows up during difficult moments becomes expected rather than appreciated. The disturbing part is that society often notices people only after they stop giving. Sometimes the hardest workers are valued more in their absence than during their presence. People suddenly realize how much someone carried only when everything begins falling apart without them. This is why many deeply exhausted people continue smiling, while secretly feeling emotionally invisible. They learned that being dependable often makes others take your sacrifices for granted, instead of celebrating them while you are still standing there carrying the weight. Most adults are just exhausted children with responsibilities. One of the strangest realizations people experience as they grow older is discovering that adulthood does not magically transform human beings into emotionally complete creatures. Beneath the bills, jobs, routines, and serious expressions, many adults are still carrying the same fears, insecurities, wounds, and confusion they had when they were younger. The only difference is that now they must survive while hiding it. As children, people imagine adults as stable figures who understand life completely. They assume grown people know exactly what they are doing, but adulthood often feels less like mastery and more like exhaustion mixed with responsibility. Many people are simply trying to make it through the day while silently battling anxiety, loneliness, financial pressure, heartbreak, regret, or emotional emptiness no one else sees. What makes this truth deeply unsettling is how normal it all appears from the outside. A person can go to work, raise children, smile in conversations, and handle responsibilities while internally feeling completely overwhelmed. Human beings become experts at functioning while emotionally drained. Some never truly heal from childhood experiences. They simply become older while learning how to suppress their emotions more effectively. This is why small moments affect adults so deeply. A little kindness can make someone emotional. A harsh comment can ruin their entire week. A simple hug, message, or sign of appreciation can feel life-changing because many people are far more emotionally fragile than they appear. The terrifying part is realizing society expects adults to continue functioning no matter how mentally exhausted they become. Bills still arrive, responsibilities continue, people still depend on them, and beneath all of it, many adults are still just tired human beings quietly searching for comfort, safety, and peace they never fully found growing up. The biggest lie loneliness tells you is that nobody cares. Loneliness does something terrifying to the human mind. It slowly changes the way you interpret reality. After enough isolation, disappointment, rejection, or emotional exhaustion, the brain begins creating a dangerous illusion that feels completely convincing, that nobody truly cares about you. What makes this lie so powerful is that loneliness does not sound emotional inside your head. It sounds logical. You begin noticing unanswered messages more than answered ones. You focus on who forgot to check on you instead of who stayed. Small moments of silence suddenly feel like proof that you are unwanted, invisible, or emotionally abandoned. Over time, loneliness turns temporary distance into permanent conclusions about your worth. The mind starts whispering things like, if people cared, they would notice, or if you disappeared, nobody would really care. What makes this psychological trap so disturbing is that loneliness often causes people to withdraw from the very connection they desperately need. They stop reaching out. They isolate themselves further. They become emotionally quieter, harder to read, harder to help. Then the silence around them grows, which only strengthens the illusion that they were alone all along. The human brain is not designed to handle prolonged emotional isolation without distortion. After enough pain, loneliness begins filtering every interaction negatively. Neutral behavior feels personal. Delayed responses feel intentional. Even love can become difficult to recognize because loneliness trains the mind to expect abandonment everywhere. The frightening part is that many people are loved far more than they realize, but emotional pain blinds them to it. Loneliness convinces people they are forgotten while others quietly think about them, worry about them, and care for them from distances they cannot see. People often choose familiarity over happiness. One of the saddest truths about human behavior is that many people would rather remain in situations that hurt them than step into situations they cannot predict. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar change. Even when people know a relationship, environment, or lifestyle is draining them emotionally, they often stay because the discomfort has become psychologically familiar. The mind starts confusing predictability with safety. This is why people remain in toxic relationships, unhealthy routines, miserable jobs, or emotionally cold environments long after they stop feeling happy inside them. The suffering becomes normalized. Arguments become routine. Loneliness becomes expected. Emotional neglect starts feeling ordinary. Over time, the fear of the unknown becomes stronger than the desire for peace. What makes this deeply unsettling is that the brain is naturally wired to avoid uncertainty. Familiar environments, even painful ones, require less emotional risk because the outcomes are predictable. Happiness, on the other hand, often demands change, vulnerability, and the terrifying possibility of failure or rejection. Many people unconsciously choose emotional prisons simply because they already know how to survive inside them. The disturbing part is how easily people adapt to unhappiness when exposed to it long enough. Someone can slowly lose their confidence, excitement, identity, and emotional energy without realizing how deeply they have settled. They convince themselves that this is just life because accepting the truth would force them to confront difficult decisions they feel unprepared to make. Over time, familiarity becomes addictive, and many people spend years protecting situations that quietly destroy them simply because uncertainty feels scarier than remaining emotionally unfulfilled. You rarely realize a moment mattered until it is impossible to relive. One of the most haunting truths about life is that the most important moments rarely announce themselves while they are happening. They often arrive disguised as ordinary days, casual conversations, small routines, or temporary experiences that feel insignificant in the moment. You do not realize you are living a memory while you are inside it. Only later, when time quietly removes it from your life forever, do you finally understand how valuable it truly was. What makes this realization emotionally devastating is how normal those moments usually seemed. A final car ride with someone you loved, a random dinner with family before everything changed, hearing a parent call your name from another room, sitting beside friends laughing about things you can barely remember now. At the time, your mind was distracted by stress, goals, worries, or plans for the future. You assumed there would always be another chance to experience it again, but life rarely warns people before closing certain doors permanently. One day, the house becomes empty, the friendship fades, the person disappears, the routine ends. Suddenly, your mind begins replaying tiny details you once ignored. The sound of their voice, the feeling of the room, the way sunlight entered through the window during an ordinary afternoon you never thought twice about. The terrifying part is realizing how much of life disappears quietly while people remain too distracted to notice it leaving. Human beings are experts at assuming there will be more time, more opportunities, more conversations, and more tomorrows. Then one day, you would give anything just to relive 10 forgotten minutes you once treated like nothing special. the people who clap the loudest for your success. Sometimes secretly resent it. One of the most disturbing truths about human relationships is that support and jealousy can exist inside the same person at the same time. Some people will celebrate your achievements publicly while privately struggling with emotions they do not even want to admit to themselves. They smile, congratulate you, repost your victories, and speak proudly about your growth, yet deep inside, your success quietly forces them to confront their own insecurities, failures, or lack of progress. What makes this reality so unsettling is that resentment rarely looks obvious in the beginning. It hides behind compliments, jokes, silence, or subtle changes in behavior. A friend who once encouraged you starts becoming strangely distant after you improve your life. Someone who supported your dreams suddenly minimizes your achievements or changes the subject whenever your success is mentioned. The energy shifts, but nothing is openly said. Human beings naturally compare themselves to people close to them. When someone they grew up with, worked beside, or considered equal suddenly begins succeeding, it can create an uncomfortable emotional mirror. Your growth becomes evidence of what they never pursued, never finished, or never believed they were capable of achieving. Instead of feeling inspired, some people quietly feel left behind. The terrifying part is that envy often grows strongest among people who know your struggles personally. Strangers may admire your success, but people who watched your beginning sometimes struggle accepting your transformation because it disrupts the version of you they felt emotionally comfortable around. Not everyone who applauds your rise truly feels peace about it. Some people clap while secretly grieving the fact that your life kept moving forward while theirs remained emotionally stuck. Nobody warns you how fast your parents age. One of the most emotionally devastating parts of growing older is realizing that your parents are growing old at the same time. When you are young, they seem permanent. Their presence feels as stable as the walls of your home. You assume there will always be more conversations, more holidays, more ordinary days together. But life changes so gradually that you often do not notice the aging until one small moment suddenly shocks you awake. Maybe it is the first time you notice gray hair spreading faster than before, the slower walk, the repeated stories, the tiredness in their voice after simple tasks, the moment they ask you for help with something they once handled effortlessly. These changes arrive quietly, almost invisibly, which is what makes them so terrifying. Aging does not announce itself loudly. It steals people in slow motion. What makes this reality emotionally painful is that most people spend years distracted by work, stress, ambition, relationships, and personal struggles, assuming time with their parents still exists in abundance. Then one day, guilt appears unexpectedly. You realize you were too busy during years that can never return. The family dinners became fewer. The phone calls became shorter. The opportunities to truly know them as human beings slowly disappeared while life kept moving forward. The frightening part is understanding that ordinary moments eventually become memories without warning. One random conversation becomes the last. One visit becomes the final holiday together. Yet while those moments are happening, they rarely feel important enough at the time. Nobody truly prepares you for the emotional shock of watching the people who once protected your entire world slowly become fragile inside it. Your life changes the moment. You stop expecting closure. One of the hardest psychological realities to accept is that many painful experiences never arrive with a satisfying explanation. People leave without honesty. Relationships end without clarity. Betrayals happen without remorse. Sometimes the apology never comes, the truth is never revealed, and the person who hurt you continues living peacefully while you remain trapped, replaying unanswered questions in your mind. What makes this so emotionally destructive is that the human brain craves resolution. We naturally want things to make sense. We want clear endings, mutual understanding, and emotional justice. This is why people spend months or even years obsessing over conversations, analyzing behavior, rereading messages, and imagining scenarios that might finally give them peace. They believe closure is something another person must give them before they can emotionally move forward. But the terrifying truth is that closure often never arrives. Some people are too selfish to explain themselves. Some are too emotionally immature to admit the damage they caused. Others simply move on without ever thinking about the pain they left behind. Waiting for them to provide emotional resolution slowly turns your healing into a hostage situation controlled by someone else's choices. The moment life begins changing is when you stop demanding understanding from people incapable of giving it. You stop chasing final explanations and start accepting uncomfortable uncertainty. Instead of asking why someone behaved the way they did, you begin focusing on what the experience revealed about them, about yourself, and about the reality of human nature. That shift is painful because it forces you to release the fantasy that every wound will eventually be explained properly. But it also frees you from spending years emotionally attached to doors that were never going to reopen. Some people keep you around only to feel superior. One of the darkest realities about human relationships is that not everyone keeps people close out of love, loyalty, or genuine connection. Some people keep others around because comparison feeds their ego. Your struggles, insecurities, failures, or dependence quietly become the thing that makes them feel more powerful, more successful, or more important in their own mind. What makes this disturbing is how difficult it can be to recognize while it is happening. These people often disguise superiority as friendship, advice, concern, or support. They may help you occasionally, encourage you in small ways, or stay involved in your life, but deep down, they become uncomfortable the moment you begin improving beyond the role they mentally assigned to you. Your growth threatens the emotional advantage they secretly enjoyed. This is why certain people subtly discourage your confidence without openly attacking you. They joke about your dreams, minimize your achievements, remind you of past mistakes, or constantly position themselves as wiser, stronger, or more stable than you. As long as you remain beneath them emotionally, financially, socially, or mentally, the relationship feels safe to them. The frightening part is that some people become emotionally attached to your weakness. Your insecurity becomes their source of confidence. Your dependence becomes their source of control. Without realizing it, you may spend years around someone who secretly needs you to stay broken so they can continue feeling whole. Everything changes the moment you start healing, succeeding, or developing self-respect. Suddenly, the energy shifts. Support becomes colder. Distance appears. Passive aggression increases. Because some relationships were never built on mutual growth. They were built on an invisible hierarchy, where your lower position made the other person feel emotionally superior. The more desperate you are to be liked, the less respected you become. One of the cruelest paradoxes in human psychology is that the harder someone tries to gain approval, the more invisible their value often becomes. People naturally respect those who appear emotionally secure, grounded, and comfortable with themselves. But desperation for validation sends the opposite signal. It quietly tells others that your self-worth depends on their acceptance. And once people sense that, the balance of respect begins to shift. What makes this truth painful is that the desire to be liked is deeply human. Almost everyone wants connection, approval, and belonging. But when that desire becomes excessive, people start abandoning their boundaries, opinions, personality, and dignity just to avoid rejection. They laugh at jokes that hurt them, tolerate disrespect, over-explain themselves, constantly seek reassurance, and say yes to things they secretly hate. Over time, they slowly disappear inside the version of themselves they think others will approve of. The disturbing part is that people often value what feels emotionally scarce. Someone who constantly seeks attention, approval, or reassurance can unintentionally make themselves easier to overlook. Meanwhile, individuals who respect themselves enough to walk away from disrespect often appear more confident, desirable, and trustworthy. Human beings are strangely drawn toward those who do not emotionally chase them. Desperation also changes behavior in subtle ways. It creates nervous energy, over-talking, people-pleasing, forced humor, and emotional dependence that others can feel instinctively even if nothing is said directly. The more someone fears rejection, the more controlled they become by other people's opinions. The terrifying realization is that chasing universal approval usually costs a person the very thing they were hoping to gain in the first place: genuine respect. Intelligence without discipline usually turns into regret. One of the cruelest ironies in life is that intelligence alone rarely guarantees success, peace, or fulfillment. In fact, some of the most deeply frustrated people are highly intelligent individuals who never learned discipline. They know exactly what they should do, understand opportunities better than others, and can often predict consequences before they happen. Yet their lives remain trapped in cycles of procrastination, inconsistency, and unrealized potential. What makes this reality so painful is that intelligence creates awareness without automatically creating action. A smart person can analyze their problems endlessly while still failing to change them. They understand why their habits are destructive, why their goals matter, and why time is slipping away, yet knowledge alone cannot overpower repeated inaction. Over time, this creates a terrifying emotional gap between what someone knows they are capable of and what they actually become. The human mind often mistakes intelligence for progress. People who are naturally gifted sometimes rely so heavily on talent that they never develop structure, resilience, or consistency. Because things came easier early in life, they avoid discomfort, discipline, and repetition. But eventually, life reaches a point where raw intelligence is no longer enough. Opportunities begin rewarding execution instead of potential. What makes this especially disturbing is that regret hits intelligent people differently. They usually know exactly where they went wrong. They replay missed opportunities, abandoned goals, wasted years, and avoidable mistakes with painful clarity. They are forced to live with the awareness that their downfall was rarely lack of ability, but lack of sustained action. The frightening truth is that unrealized potential becomes heavier with age, especially when someone knows they could have built a completely different life if discipline had matched their intelligence. Many people never become who they wanted because comfort seduced them slowly. One of the most dangerous things about comfort is that it rarely feels destructive while it is happening. It arrives quietly, disguised as rest, convenience, entertainment, routine, or temporary relief. At first, it feels harmless to delay the workout, postpone the dream, avoid the risk, or settle for good enough. But over time, comfort slowly rewires your standards until the life you once feared becomes the life you eventually accept. What makes this so terrifying is that most people do not consciously give up on their potential. They slowly drift away from it. One distraction becomes a habit. One excuse becomes a lifestyle. 1 year of waiting quietly becomes 10. The human mind naturally seeks what feels easy, familiar, and emotionally safe, even when those choices quietly destroy long-term growth. Comfort is seductive because it removes immediate pain while secretly increasing future regret. Growth requires uncertainty, discipline, rejection, sacrifice, and emotional discomfort. Comfort asks for none of those things. It offers small pleasures in exchange for your momentum. endless scrolling instead of building, staying silent instead of taking risks, remaining average instead of facing the terrifying possibility of failure. The disturbing part is how invisible this process feels while it unfolds. People often believe they still have time. They keep imagining the future version of themselves who will eventually become disciplined, focused, courageous, and successful. Meanwhile, their daily habits are quietly shaping a completely different future. Years later, many people wake up with a painful realization. They did not lose their dreams in one dramatic moment. They lost them gradually through repeated comfort, small avoidance, and tiny decisions that felt insignificant at the time, but slowly transformed potential into regret. One day, you will realize you were mourning people who never mourned losing you. One of the most painful awakenings in life is discovering that you grieved certain people far more deeply than they ever grieved you. For months, sometimes years, you replay the memories, question what went wrong, carry emotional weight, and secretly hope the connection still mattered to them the way it mattered to you. Meanwhile, they moved on quietly, emotionally untouched, in ways that feel almost impossible to accept. What makes this realization so devastating is that human beings naturally assume emotional experiences are shared equally. If someone changed your life, you believe losing you must have affected them too. If you spent nights hurting over their absence, you imagine they must have felt some version of that same emptiness. But relationships are rarely balanced emotionally. Some people leave carrying guilt, others leave carrying relief. This truth becomes especially disturbing when you realize how much emotional energy you sacrificed mourning people who barely paused after losing you. While you were overthinking conversations, rereading messages, struggling to sleep, and carrying silent heartbreak, they were building new routines, creating new attachments, and continuing life without the emotional collapse you secretly imagined they were hiding. The frightening part is how long denial can protect you from this truth. Sometimes people hold on to old connections because accepting the imbalance feels unbearable. Admitting that someone mattered more to you than you mattered to them can damage pride, identity, and self-worth all at once. But eventually, reality becomes impossible to ignore. You begin noticing who truly fought to keep you, who replaced you easily, and who only existed in your life temporarily while you were emotionally treating them as permanent. Trauma can make chaos feel like home. One of the most disturbing effects of trauma is that it can completely distort a person's sense of normal. When someone grows up surrounded by instability, emotional pain, conflict, fear, or unpredictability, for long enough, the nervous system begins adapting to chaos as if it were safety. Over time, peace can start feeling unfamiliar, uncomfortable, or even suspicious, while dysfunction feels strangely natural. This is why some people repeatedly enter toxic relationships, sabotage calm situations, or feel restless whenever life becomes emotionally stable. Their mind has spent years associating intensity with connection. Yelling feels like passion. Anxiety feels like love. Emotional unpredictability feels exciting. Silence feels dangerous. The body becomes so used to surviving stress that calmness almost feels empty. What makes this truth terrifying is that many people do not realize they are recreating their trauma. Someone raised in a household filled with emotional instability may unconsciously seek partners who trigger the same emotional highs and lows. A person who spent childhood walking on eggshells may later feel uncomfortable around emotionally healthy people because stability feels foreign to their nervous system. Chaos becomes emotionally recognizable, and human beings are naturally drawn toward what feels familiar, even when it hurts them. Trauma also changes the brain's relationship with survival. Constant stress teaches the mind to stay alert at all times, searching for danger even when none exists. This creates a life where peace feels temporary and disaster always feels close. Some people become addicted to emotional intensity because stillness forces them to confront pain they spent years outrunning. The heartbreaking part is that healing often feels uncomfortable at first, not because peace is wrong, but because after surviving chaos for so long, the nervous system forgets what genuine safety is supposed to feel like. Some opportunities disappear because you waited to feel confident. One of the most dangerous lies people believe is that confidence comes before action. They wait for the fear to disappear, for certainty to arrive, or for some magical feeling of readiness before taking the opportunity standing in front of them. But life rarely works that way. Confidence is usually the result of action, not the requirement for it. And while people wait to feel ready, opportunities quietly move on without them. What makes this so painful is that hesitation often feels intelligent in the moment. The mind convinces you that waiting is responsible, careful, or strategic. You tell yourself you need more time, more preparation, more skill, or more certainty before making the move. But underneath that logic is often fear disguised as caution. Fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, fear of rejection, fear of discovering you are not as capable as you hoped. The terrifying part is that opportunities rarely stay frozen while you battle your insecurities. Someone else applies for the position. Someone else starts the business idea. Someone else approaches the person you were too afraid to talk to. Life keeps rewarding movement while hesitation quietly leaves people behind. Over time, this creates a specific type of regret that is emotionally brutal because it was avoidable. You begin replaying moments where your life could have changed completely if you had acted before feeling fully confident. The human mind suffers deeply from missed chances because imagination keeps showing you the version of life that almost happened. What makes this truth so disturbing is realizing that many successful people were terrified when they began. They simply moved while afraid. Meanwhile, countless talented people remain stuck, waiting for confidence that was never supposed to come first. People often remember how you made them feel more than what you sacrificed for them. One of the most painful truths about human relationships is that effort alone does not guarantee emotional appreciation. You can sacrifice your time, energy, sleep, opportunities, money, and even your own mental peace for someone. Yet the thing they remember most is how you made them feel during certain moments. Human beings are emotional creatures first. Feelings often leave deeper imprints than logic, loyalty, or sacrifice ever will. What makes this reality so heartbreaking is that many people silently destroy themselves trying to prove love through sacrifice. They believe suffering for others will automatically create lasting appreciation. They stay available during every crisis, tolerate disrespect, forgive endlessly, and carry emotional burdens nobody notices. But one moment of anger, emotional distance, or disappointment can suddenly overshadow years of quiet loyalty in another person's memory. The human mind naturally prioritizes emotional experiences because emotions create stronger psychological impressions than invisible acts of effort. Someone may completely overlook the countless sacrifices you made privately, yet vividly remember the night you made them feel rejected, embarrassed, unimportant, or misunderstood. This is why relationships often collapse despite years of devotion. Emotional impact shapes memory more powerfully than hidden suffering. The disturbing part is that many people give everything to others while neglecting their own emotional well-being, believing sacrifice alone will protect the relationship. Then one day, they are shocked to realize the other person barely understood the depth of what was given. Over time, this teaches a brutal lesson about human nature. People may forget how hard you worked for them, but they rarely forget how your presence emotionally shaped their inner world, especially during moments when they felt most vulnerable. The most dangerous habits are the ones that feel harmless daily. One of the most terrifying things about self-destruction is that it rarely arrives looking dangerous in the beginning. The habits that ruin people's lives are often small, comfortable, and emotionally invisible at first. That is what makes them so powerful. Human beings naturally fear sudden disasters, but slow destruction almost always feels safe while it is happening. A single night of procrastination feels harmless. One unhealthy meal feels harmless. One lie feels harmless. 1 hour wasted scrolling endlessly through distractions feels harmless. But dangerous habits are not built through intensity. They are built through repetition. What you repeat daily quietly shapes your mind, your discipline, your confidence, and eventually your entire future without demanding immediate consequences. What makes this psychologically disturbing is how the brain adapts to repeated behavior. The more often you do something, the more normal it begins to feel, even when it is slowly damaging you. Over time, bad habits stop feeling like choices and start becoming identity. Laziness becomes comfort. Avoidance becomes routine. Emotional suppression becomes personality. You no longer notice the damage because your mind has adjusted to living inside it. The frightening part is that slow habits rarely announce the moment they become dangerous. People usually realize the damage only after years disappear. One day, they wake up emotionally exhausted, unhealthy, undisciplined, lonely, financially unstable, or deeply unhappy without understanding how they arrived there so gradually. Most lives are not destroyed by one catastrophic decision. They are quietly shaped by tiny repeated behaviors people underestimated because the consequences were delayed, and delayed consequences are incredibly dangerous because they allow people to feel safe while slowly building the very future that will eventually trap them. You can outgrow people who once felt permanent. One of the most painful truths about life is realizing that some relationships are only meant to exist for a certain version of you. There are people who once felt inseparable from your identity, people you believed would remain beside you forever. Yet as time passes, growth quietly changes the emotional connection between you. What once felt natural slowly begins to feel forced, distant, or emotionally exhausting. What makes this realization so heartbreaking is that nobody necessarily becomes evil. Sometimes people simply stop evolving in the same direction. One person grows emotionally, while the other stays attached to old habits. One begins healing while the other remains comfortable inside chaos. One starts chasing purpose while the other resents change. Over time, conversations lose depth, energy shifts, and the relationship that once felt effortless starts feeling strangely heavy. Human beings often cling to old connections because of history. Shared memories create emotional attachment, powerful enough to make people ignore present reality. They keep trying to revive who the relationship used to be instead of accepting who both people have become now. But history alone cannot sustain emotional alignment forever. The terrifying part is that outgrowing someone can feel like grieving a person who is still alive. You still care about them. You still remember what they meant to you, but deep inside, you know the connection no longer fits the person you are becoming. Staying sometimes requires shrinking yourself emotionally just to preserve familiarity. Many people remain trapped in outdated relationships because they fear loneliness more than disconnection. But growth often demands separation. Not every person who walks with you during one chapter is meant to survive every transformation that follows. Sometimes evolution itself quietly ends relationships that once felt impossible to lose. Most jealousy hides behind jokes. One of the most unsettling things about jealousy is that it rarely introduces itself honestly. Very few people openly admit they envy someone. Instead, jealousy often disguises itself as humor, sarcasm, teasing, or just being honest. A person smiles while insulting your success. They laugh while subtly attacking your appearance, goals, relationships, or confidence. And because it is wrapped inside a joke, confronting it makes you seem overly sensitive, which is exactly why this behavior becomes so difficult to challenge. What makes this disturbing is how socially acceptable disguised jealousy has become. Someone mocks your ambition every time you talk about your goals. They make passive comments about your appearance after you improve yourself. They downplay your achievements with fake humor or constantly remind you of your past mistakes whenever you begin growing beyond the version of yourself they felt comfortable around. On the surface, it sounds playful. Underneath, there is often resentment quietly leaking through the cracks. The human ego struggles deeply when someone close begins evolving in ways that expose another person's insecurity, laziness, or dissatisfaction. Instead of admitting envy directly, many people protect their pride through disguised criticism. Humor becomes the perfect hiding place because it gives them emotional cover. If the comment hurts you, they can instantly retreat behind, "I was only joking." What makes this emotionally dangerous is that repeated disguised jealousy slowly damages confidence and trust. You begin second-guessing yourself around certain people. You feel drained after conversations without fully understanding why. The relationship starts feeling emotionally unsafe, even though no obvious conflict exists. The frightening truth is that some people clap for your success publicly while quietly resenting every step you take toward becoming someone they secretly wish they could be themselves. Some people only support your dreams when they stay small. One of the most unsettling truths about human relationships is that support often has invisible limits. Many people cheer for your dreams only while those dreams feel safe, realistic, or non-threatening to their own identity. They encourage your growth when it looks small enough to control, but the moment your ambition starts becoming real, uncomfortable, or powerful, their energy quietly changes. At first, the shift is subtle. The excitement disappears from their voice. The encouragement becomes weaker. The jokes become sharper. Suddenly, the same people who once told you to go for it begin warning you to be careful, realistic, or humble. Not always because they hate you, but because your growth starts forcing them to confront their own fears, limitations, or lack of action. What makes this so psychologically painful is that human beings naturally expect support from those closest to them. We assume friends, family, or partners will celebrate our success the same way we imagine it ourselves. But ambition changes social dynamics. The bigger your vision becomes, the more it unintentionally threatens people who found comfort in the smaller version of you. Some people loved your dream when it looked like a hobby. They loved it when failure still seemed likely. But once your confidence grows, your discipline sharpens, and success becomes possible, they begin emotionally distancing themselves because your progress disrupts the balance they unconsciously relied on. The disturbing part is realizing that not everyone wants to see you fail completely. Some people simply want your success to remain small enough that it never challenges their sense of security, superiority, or comfort. And the moment your potential becomes undeniable, their hidden discomfort finally reveals itself. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate repeatedly. One of the harshest truths about human behavior is that people carefully observe what you allow, not just what you say. Boundaries are not created through words alone. They are created through consequences, consistency, and repeated behavior. The moment you continuously tolerate disrespect, manipulation, neglect, or dishonesty without resistance, you silently train others to believe that behavior is acceptable around you. What makes this reality disturbing is how slowly it happens. Nobody wakes up one morning and suddenly decides to disrespect you completely. Most toxic treatment grows gradually through repeated small moments you ignored because you wanted peace, love, approval, or emotional connection. A rude comment you laughed off, a broken promise you excused, a boundary violation you stayed silent about. Each time it happens without consequence, the behavior becomes more normalized. Over time, people stop questioning whether they can mistreat you because your tolerance already answered the question for them. Human beings naturally adapt to the standards they are repeatedly exposed to. If someone learns they can ignore your feelings, disappear when convenient, manipulate your emotions, or cross your boundaries without losing access to you, many will continue doing it because nothing forced them to stop. The frightening part is that excessive tolerance often comes from fear of abandonment, fear of conflict, fear of losing someone you care about. But in trying to avoid temporary discomfort, many people slowly sacrifice their self-respect piece by piece until unhealthy treatment becomes their emotional normal. This is why certain relationships feel emotionally draining for years. Not because people failed to notice the disrespect, but because they kept hoping kindness alone would eventually make others change without ever demanding different behavior. The longer you ignore your health, the louder your body eventually speaks. One of the cruelest realities about the human body is that it often stays silent while damage is slowly building beneath the surface. People ignore exhaustion, stress, poor sleep, emotional burnout, unhealthy eating, lack of movement, and constant anxiety because the consequences do not appear immediately. At first, the body whispers through small signs: headaches, fatigue, tension, brain fog, digestive problems, or sleepless nights. Most people dismiss these warnings because they still seem functional enough to continue living normally. What makes this truth terrifying is how patient the body can be before it finally forces someone to listen. Human beings are incredibly skilled at overriding discomfort temporarily. They numb themselves with distractions, caffeine, entertainment, work, or unhealthy habits while convincing themselves they will deal with it later. But the body keeps recording everything, every ignored symptom, every stressful year, every night of emotional exhaustion. Every moment of neglect slowly accumulates beneath the surface. Then one day, the whispers become impossible to ignore. Panic attacks begin, chronic pain appears, energy disappears. The body that quietly carried someone through years of neglect suddenly starts demanding attention in ways that disrupt daily life completely. What could have been prevented earlier now becomes something much harder to repair. The disturbing part is that many people treat health as important only after losing it. They sacrifice sleep for productivity, peace for money, and emotional well-being for survival until their body eventually forces a pause they never willingly chose. Your body is not separate from your life. It absorbs your habits, your stress, your emotional pain, and your neglect silently over time. And the longer someone refuses to listen to the early warnings, the harsher the body eventually becomes when it finally decides it can no longer stay quiet. Sometimes the lesson was the relationship. One of the hardest truths to accept is that not every relationship enters your life to last. Some people arrive to teach you something painful, necessary, or life-changing, and once that lesson is complete, the relationship slowly falls apart, no matter how badly you wanted it to survive. What makes this emotionally devastating is that humans naturally attach meaning to permanence. We believe deep connection should guarantee longevity. So when someone important leaves, the mind desperately searches for ways to fix what may have never been meant to stay. Some relationships teach you your worth by showing you what happens when you constantly abandon it. Others expose your deepest insecurities, fears, or emotional wounds that were invisible before the connection began. Certain people enter your life to reveal patterns you kept repeating, boundaries you never enforced, or parts of yourself you were too afraid to confront alone. The relationship feels like love, destiny, or forever. But underneath it, life is quietly forcing growth through emotional pain. What makes this truth so disturbing is that lessons are often only visible after the damage is done. While inside the relationship, people usually focus on saving it, understanding it, or returning things to how they used to feel. Only later do they realize the connection transformed them in ways that staying together never could have. The human mind struggles with endings because it wants emotional investment to guarantee emotional reward. But sometimes the reward was the wisdom gained through heartbreak itself. Sometimes losing someone teaches more than keeping them ever would have. The frightening part is realizing that certain people were never meant to stay in your life permanently. They were meant to change the person you would become after they were gone. Being emotionally unavailable can look like independence. One of the most deceptive psychological illusions is how easily emotional unavailability can disguise itself as strength. Many people proudly describe themselves as independent, guarded, detached, or self-sufficient, believing they have mastered emotional control, when in reality they have simply become afraid of vulnerability. What appears powerful on the surface is often a survival mechanism built from disappointment, betrayal, abandonment, or emotional pain that was never fully healed. What makes this so dangerous is that emotional unavailability is frequently rewarded by society. The person who doesn't need anyone appears strong. The person who rarely expresses feelings appears mature. The person who stays distant, avoids attachment, and never opens up seems emotionally disciplined. But underneath that calm exterior, there is often fear hiding in plain sight. Fear of rejection, fear of dependence, fear of being fully seen and emotionally hurt again. Over time, people begin confusing avoidance with peace. They convince themselves they are protecting their energy when they are actually avoiding intimacy. They call it independence when, deep down, they no longer trust others enough to feel emotionally safe. The walls become so normalized that loneliness starts feeling comfortable. The disturbing part is that emotionally unavailable people often do not realize how much pain they silently create in relationships. They struggle to express affection, avoid difficult emotional conversations, and pull away the moment vulnerability becomes necessary. Their partners feel confused because the connection seems close one moment and emotionally unreachable the next. The terrifying truth is that some people spend years believing they are emotionally strong, when in reality they are simply emotionally wounded in ways that taught them survival feels safer than genuine connection. The world becomes colder when you realize effort is not always rewarded. One of the most emotionally painful realizations in adulthood is discovering that hard work does not guarantee success, loyalty does not guarantee love, and kindness does not guarantee respect. As children, many people are raised to believe life operates fairly, that if you do the right thing consistently, the world will eventually return that effort back to you. But reality often shatters that belief in deeply unsettling ways. You begin noticing people who lie rising faster than honest people. You see hard-working individuals remain invisible while less deserving people receive opportunities, praise, and attention. You watch loyal people get betrayed, patient people get ignored, and compassionate people get emotionally drained by those who only take from them. Slowly, the world loses part of its warmth because you realize fairness is not built into life automatically. What makes this truth psychologically exhausting is that human beings naturally search for meaning in suffering. People tolerate pain more easily when they believe their sacrifices will eventually lead somewhere meaningful, but when effort repeatedly goes unnoticed or unrewarded, emotional fatigue begins replacing hope. Some people stop trying entirely because disappointment slowly convinces them that nothing they do truly matters. The frightening part is how this realization changes personality over time. Optimistic people become emotionally guarded, generous people become cautious, ambitious people quietly lose motivation after too many invisible battles nobody ever acknowledged. The emotional innocence they once carried begins disappearing. Yet the cruelest part is that life still demands effort anyway. Even after discovering the world is not always fair, people must still wake up, continue fighting, continue building, and continue moving forward without any guarantee that their sacrifices will ever be fully recognized or rewarded. You can waste your entire youth preparing to finally live later. One of the saddest traps in life is spending years believing happiness will begin someday in the future. Many people quietly sacrifice their entire youth chasing a moment where they will finally allow themselves to feel alive. They tell themselves they will rest later, enjoy life later, travel later, love later, pursue passion later, or feel peace later. But later slowly becomes a moving destination that never truly arrives. What makes this so dangerous is that society often rewards this mindset. People are praised for overworking, suppressing emotions, ignoring relationships, and postponing joy in the name of success or survival. At first, it feels responsible. You convince yourself you are building a better future, but somewhere along the way, preparation quietly replaces living itself. Life becomes an endless cycle of waiting for the perfect time that never comes. The terrifying part is how gradual it feels. Years disappear almost invisibly through routines, obligations, stress, and constant pressure to achieve more. One day you suddenly realize the version of yourself that once felt curious, energetic, and emotionally alive has slowly become exhausted and emotionally numb. The dreams that once excited you begin feeling distant, unrealistic, or forgotten entirely. Human beings often assume they will always have time later to reconnect with themselves, but youth is not permanent. Energy changes, responsibilities grow, people age, parents grow older, relationships fade. Opportunities quietly vanish, while someone keeps preparing for a life they never fully enter. The disturbing truth is that some people spend their healthiest years rehearsing life instead of experiencing it. They survive efficiently, work endlessly, and postpone joy so long that when freedom finally arrives, they no longer remember how to truly feel alive inside it. Not everyone who understands your pain wants you healed. One of the darkest truths about human nature is that some people are deeply drawn to wounded individuals, not because they genuinely want to heal them, but because pain makes people easier to control, influence, or emotionally depend on them. They listen to your trauma, study your insecurities, and learn exactly where you are emotionally vulnerable. At first, this feels comforting, because being understood during painful moments creates intense emotional attachment. But understanding someone's pain and wanting their healing are not always the same thing. What makes this disturbing is how invisible it can feel in the beginning. Some people enjoy being needed more than they enjoy seeing others grow stronger. Your sadness gives them purpose. Your insecurity gives them importance. Your emotional dependence makes them feel powerful, valued, or irreplaceable. So instead of helping you fully heal, they unconsciously keep you emotionally wounded enough to continue needing them. This often appears in subtle ways. They support your suffering more than your progress. They seem uncomfortable when you become more confident, independent, or emotionally stable. They encourage endless conversations about pain, but quietly resist the changes required for healing. The relationship starts revolving around your wounds instead of your growth. The terrifying part is that emotional pain creates strong bonds very quickly. When someone deeply understands your trauma, it feels rare and intimate, which makes manipulation harder to recognize. You begin trusting the person simply because they get you, while failing to notice that your healing would actually reduce their emotional influence over your life. Some people do not fear your brokenness. They fear the version of you that no longer needs them once you finally recover. Many people stay busy because silence exposes what they are avoiding. One of the most uncomfortable truths about human behavior is that constant busyness is not always productivity. Sometimes it is escape. Many people fill every moment of their lives with noise, work, scrolling, conversations, entertainment, or endless tasks because silence forces them to confront thoughts and emotions they have been running from for years. The moment everything becomes quiet, the mind begins revealing what distraction was hiding. What makes this so disturbing is how socially rewarded busyness has become. Society praises people who are constantly occupied, constantly working, constantly moving. From the outside, it looks ambitious and disciplined. But internally, some people are terrified of stillness because stillness removes the distractions, protecting them from unresolved pain, loneliness, regret, insecurity, or fear. The human mind naturally avoids emotional discomfort. This is why some people cannot sit alone without reaching for their phone, turning on music, opening social media, or finding another task to consume their attention. Silence becomes threatening because it exposes buried emotions that daily activity temporarily keeps unconscious. Over time, this creates a dangerous cycle where a person becomes addicted to stimulation. They feel anxious during rest. They struggle to be present. They keep overloading their schedule, not because life truly requires it, but because slowing down would force them to meet the parts of themselves they have been avoiding emotionally. The terrifying part is that years can disappear this way. A person can spend their entire life staying occupied while never truly understanding themselves. And eventually, when distractions fade during late nights, heartbreak, failure, or isolation, everything they avoided emotionally returns at once, louder and heavier than ever before. Your habits are building your future, even when you feel unmotivated. One of the most unsettling truths about life is that your future is being shaped every single day, even during the moments when you feel lazy, distracted, emotionally exhausted, or completely unmotivated. Human beings often believe change only happens during dramatic breakthroughs or moments of intense inspiration, but the reality is far more disturbing. Your daily habits quietly build your identity, whether you feel inspired or not. What makes this psychologically dangerous is that most habits feel insignificant while they are happening. One skipped workout feels harmless. One night, wasted scrolling endlessly through distractions, feels harmless. One postponed goal feels harmless. But habits operate like slow, invisible architects. Every repeated action strengthens a version of yourself little by little until that version eventually becomes your normal life. The human brain is designed to automate repeated behavior. The more often you repeat something, the less mental resistance your brain creates against it. This means discipline becomes easier when practiced repeatedly, but so does procrastination, avoidance, laziness, and self-destruction. Over time, habits stop feeling like decisions and start becoming identity. You no longer simply procrastinate sometimes. You become someone who avoids difficult things automatically. The frightening part is that motivation is temporary, but habits continue operating long after emotions disappear. Some people wait their entire lives to feel ready before changing, not realizing their current routines are already deciding who they will become years from now. Meanwhile, time keeps moving silently. Everyday repeated behaviors, either strengthen your future or weaken it. Even on days when you feel emotionally disconnected from your goals, your habits are still shaping the person you are slowly becoming behind the scenes without asking for your permission. Most people would rather hear comforting lies than inconvenient truth. One of the darkest realities about human nature is that truth is not always welcomed simply because it is true. People often claim they want honesty, clarity, and authenticity, but many only want truth when it does not threaten their comfort, identity, or emotional security. The moment reality becomes painful, inconvenient, or emotionally destabilizing, the human mind naturally begins searching for softer explanations that feel safer to believe. What makes this truth unsettling is how deeply self-deception exists in everyday life. People stay in unhealthy relationships because the truth of being unloved feels more painful than false hope. Others ignore obvious warning signs because accepting reality would force difficult decisions they are emotionally unprepared to make. Entire lives can quietly revolve around comforting illusions carefully maintained to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths. The human brain is designed to protect emotional stability. This is why people often reject criticism, deny reality, or become defensive when confronted with information that challenges how they see themselves. A comforting lie preserves emotional peace temporarily, while truth often demands change, accountability, sacrifice, or painful self-awareness, and many people would rather protect their current comfort than face the emotional cost of transformation. This is also why honest people are sometimes disliked. Someone who speaks uncomfortable truths threatens illusions others desperately depend on for emotional survival. Truth can expose weakness, failure, hypocrisy, denial, or wasted time, and not everyone is psychologically ready to face those things. The terrifying part is that comforting lies can slowly destroy lives while still feeling emotionally pleasant in the moment. A person can spend years living inside denial because reality feels too painful to accept, only to eventually realize the truth they avoided early became far more devastating after years of pretending it was not there. A bad morning can ruin a weak mind. One of the most frightening things about the human mind is how quickly it can spiral after a single negative moment. A stressful message, a small failure, bad news, an argument, or even waking up in the wrong emotional state can completely poison the rest of the day if the mind lacks emotional control. What should have been a temporary inconvenience slowly transforms into hours of frustration, overthinking, negativity, and emotional exhaustion. What makes this so dangerous is that weak mental states rarely collapse all at once. They unravel through emotional reactions that feel small in the beginning. One bad moment creates irritation. Irritation changes your thoughts. Negative thoughts affect your decisions, tone, energy, and behavior. Suddenly, a problem that lasted 5 minutes emotionally controls the next 10 hours of your life. The human brain naturally looks for evidence that matches its emotional state. Once negativity enters unchecked, the mind begins collecting more reasons to stay negative. A delayed response feels personal. Minor inconveniences feel bigger than they are. Neutral situations start appearing hostile. This is why emotionally undisciplined people often carry one bad morning into their relationships, work, conversations, and decisions without realizing how much damage they are spreading. What makes this reality disturbing is that life constantly tests emotional stability through ordinary discomfort. Traffic, criticism, stress, rejection, mistakes, exhaustion, and uncertainty are unavoidable parts of being alive. A weak mind allows these moments to dominate its identity for the day. A disciplined mind absorbs them without surrendering control. The terrifying truth is that many people are not destroyed by major tragedies. they are slowly destroyed by their inability to emotionally recover from small negative moments repeated every single day. People rarely change after apologies. They change after consequences. One of the harshest truths about human nature is that words alone rarely transform behavior. People apologize every day while continuing the exact same actions that caused the damage in the first place. This is because apologies often relieve guilt without requiring real internal change. Consequences, however, force reality into the situation. They create discomfort strong enough to challenge behavior patterns that empty words never could. What makes this so psychologically disturbing is how easily humans confuse remorse with transformation. Someone cries, promises improvement, explains their pain, or says they never meant to hurt you again, and for a moment it feels sincere. But sincerity does not automatically create discipline, accountability, or emotional growth. Many people genuinely regret the damage they caused while still lacking the strength to stop repeating it. The human brain learns most deeply through pain, loss, and consequence. As long as destructive behavior continues producing comfort, access, forgiveness, or second chances, there is little psychological pressure to truly evolve. A person who constantly lies but never loses trust has no reason to confront their dishonesty. Someone who repeatedly disrespects boundaries while still receiving love slowly learns that apologies are enough to reset the cycle. This is why some relationships become emotionally exhausting prisons of repetition. The same betrayal happens, the same apology follows, the same hope returns. But nothing fundamentally changes because the behavior never collided with a serious enough consequence to force reflection. The terrifying part is realizing that some people only begin changing after they finally lose something important. Not when they hurt you, not when you cried, not when you begged them to stop, but when the consequences finally become painful enough that continuing the same behavior costs them more than changing ever would. You will never fully know how others experience you. One of the most psychologically unsettling truths about human existence is that you will never truly see yourself the way other people see you. No matter how self-aware you become, there will always be versions of you living inside other people's minds that you cannot fully control, understand, or even access. Every person experiences a slightly different version of you, shaped by their emotions, memories, insecurities, expectations, and personal history. What makes this reality so disturbing is how much of your identity exists outside your own perception. Someone may remember you as the person who saved them during their darkest moment, while another remembers you as the reason they lost trust in people. One person experiences your silence as peace, another experiences it as rejection. The same words, expressions, or actions can leave completely different emotional scars or comforts depending on who receives them. This means there are versions of yourself you will never meet. Versions created inside classrooms, relationships, workplaces, conversations, and brief encounters you already forgot happened. Sometimes people carry memories of you for years, while you barely remember them at all. Other times, someone you deeply cared about remembers you in a completely different way than you imagined. The frightening part is realizing how impossible total control over your image truly is. Human beings spend enormous amounts of energy trying to manage perception, seeking approval, avoiding judgment, and crafting identities they hope others will understand correctly. But perception is filtered through emotion, and emotion distorts reality constantly. Some people will misunderstand your intentions no matter how pure they were. Some will admire qualities you secretly hate about yourself. Others will resent you for reasons you may never fully understand. and you will spend your entire life being partially unknown, even to the people closest to you. The need to prove yourself never truly ends unless you end it. One of the most exhausting psychological prisons a person can live inside is the constant need to prove their worth to other people. At first, it feels understandable. You want respect, recognition, validation, or acknowledgement after being ignored, underestimated, rejected, or doubted. You tell yourself that once you become successful enough, attractive enough, intelligent enough, wealthy enough, or admired enough, the feeling will finally disappear. But it rarely does. What makes this cycle so dangerous is that external validation only provides temporary relief. Every achievement creates a brief emotional high before insecurity quietly returns again. Someone compliments you, and it feels good for a moment. You accomplish a goal, and the satisfaction fades faster than expected. Then the mind immediately searches for the next thing to prove, because self-worth built on other people's approval can never fully feel stable. The terrifying part is that many people spend their entire lives performing instead of living. They overwork to impress parents who were emotionally unavailable. They chase status to silence old insecurities. They seek attention online to temporarily feel significant. They become addicted to praise because deep down they still feel unseen by themselves. Human beings who constantly need validation become emotionally controlled by the opinions of others. Compliments determine their confidence. Criticism destroys their peace. Rejection feels catastrophic because their identity depends on external acceptance instead of internal stability. The disturbing truth is that there will always be someone unimpressed, someone more successful, someone who misunderstands you, or someone who refuses to validate your worth no matter how much you achieve. The need to prove yourself never naturally disappears through accomplishment alone. It only ends when you stop handing your self-worth to other people's opinions. Some people are only loyal to your lowest version. One of the most disturbing truths about relationships is that some people become uncomfortable the moment you begin improving your life. They supported you when you were insecure, struggling, broken, confused, or emotionally dependent. But once you start becoming more confident, disciplined, successful, or independent, the energy between you quietly changes. What felt like loyalty suddenly begins feeling distant, competitive, or strangely cold. This happens because not everyone bonds with you out of genuine love. Some people bond with the version of you that made them feel safer about themselves. Your weakness created balance in the relationship. Your insecurity made them feel needed. Your lack of confidence allowed them to feel more powerful, more successful, or more emotionally important. But growth changes social dynamics, and not everyone emotionally survives that shift. What makes this painful is how subtle the transformation can feel at first. They stop celebrating your wins with the same enthusiasm. They make small jokes about your improvement. They become strangely silent when good things happen to you. Sometimes they even encourage old habits that once kept you emotionally small because your growth unintentionally threatens the role they held in your life. The human ego struggles deeply when someone close begins evolving beyond the identity it memorized. Some people love familiarity more than they love your progress. They want the old version of you because that version was easier to predict, easier to influence, or easier to stand beside without confronting their own stagnation. The terrifying part is realizing that certain relationships were never built around your highest potential. They were built around your suffering, your insecurity, or your inability to outgrow the environment that kept everyone emotionally comfortable. The fear of embarrassment has destroyed more dreams than failure ever did. One of the cruelest psychological traps in life is realizing that many people never truly fail because they never truly begin. They stay silent, hidden, and inactive, not because they lack talent or opportunity, but because they are terrified of looking foolish in front of others. The fear of embarrassment quietly kills ambitions long before failure ever gets the chance to. What makes this so dangerous is that embarrassment feels emotionally catastrophic to the human brain. Being laughed at, judged, rejected, criticized, or publicly failing triggers a deep social fear rooted in human survival instincts. For thousands of years, social rejection meant danger. Even today, people would often rather remain miserable privately than risk humiliation publicly. This is why so many dreams die in invisible ways. A person refuses to start the business because people might mock them if it fails. Someone avoids pursuing love because rejection would damage their pride. Another hides their creativity, intelligence, or ambition because standing out attracts attention, criticism, and comparison. The dream slowly suffocates under the weight of imagined judgment. The disturbing part is that embarrassment is usually temporary, but regret can last for decades. Most people who take risks eventually recover from failure emotionally. What destroys them later is realizing how many opportunities they abandoned simply to protect their image in front of people who were never thinking about them as much as they feared. Over time, fear trains people to choose emotional safety over growth. They become experts at avoiding discomfort while secretly watching life pass them by. And one day, many people wake up haunted not by the failures they experienced, but by the possibilities they never had the courage to attempt. Nobody can save a person. Addicted to self-destruction. One of the most heartbreaking truths about human behavior is that not everyone wants to be saved, even when they are clearly destroying themselves. Some people become so emotionally attached to their pain, chaos, toxic habits, or destructive patterns that help begins to feel threatening instead of comforting. No matter how much love, support, advice, or patience others offer, nothing truly changes until the person decides they are finally tired of destroying their own life. What makes this reality emotionally devastating is how badly people want to rescue those they care about. Human beings naturally believe love can heal anything if enough effort is given. They stay up late comforting someone, forgive the same harmful behavior repeatedly, sacrifice their own peace, and slowly exhaust themselves trying to save a person who keeps returning to the very things hurting them. Over time, the rescuer becomes emotionally drained while the destructive cycle continues, repeating endlessly. The disturbing part is that self-destruction often becomes psychologically addictive. Some people grow so familiar with pain, instability, failure, toxic relationships, or emotional chaos that peace starts feeling uncomfortable to them. Healthy love feels suspicious. Stability feels boring. Progress feels unfamiliar. Without realizing it, they repeatedly sabotage opportunities, relationships, and healing because suffering became part of their identity long ago. This creates a terrifying cycle where people cry for help while simultaneously rejecting the very things that could save them. They may want relief from the consequences of destruction without wanting to release the behaviors causing it. And eventually, those trying to help begin realizing a painful truth. You cannot force healing onto someone who is emotionally committed to remaining broken. No amount of love can permanently save someone who keeps finding comfort inside their own destruction. The strongest people often have nobody checking on them. One of the saddest truths about human relationships is that strong people are often emotionally abandoned precisely because they appear strong. The person who always handles problems calmly, gives advice, supports others, stays reliable during crises, and keeps functioning under pressure slowly becomes viewed as someone who does not need help themselves. Over time, people stop asking if they are okay because they assume strength means stability. What makes this so painful is that strength is often misunderstood. Many strong people are not emotionally invincible. They are simply individuals who learned how to survive without expecting support. Some became strong because life forced them to carry pain silently for years. Others learned early that vulnerability made people uncomfortable, so they trained themselves to hide their struggles behind composure, humor, productivity, or emotional control. The terrifying part is that the people who look the most emotionally stable are sometimes the closest to emotional exhaustion. They spend so much time holding everyone else together that nobody notices when they are quietly falling apart themselves. They answer messages, solve problems, go to work, smile in conversations, and continue helping others while secretly wishing someone would notice they are tired too. Human beings naturally focus attention on visible vulnerability. People rush toward those openly breaking down, but they often overlook the quiet suffering of those who continue functioning normally despite carrying enormous emotional weight internally. Over time, strong people can begin feeling emotionally invisible. They become everyone's safe place while having no safe place of their own. And because they rarely ask for help directly, others assume they do not need it. The heartbreaking reality is that some of the strongest people you know are surviving life almost entirely alone while making sure everyone else feels supported. Sometimes your gut feeling is simply accumulated experience noticing danger. Faster than logic. One of the strangest things about the human mind is that it often notices danger long before conscious thought catches up. People call it intuition, instinct, or a gut feeling. But many times it is not magic at all. It is the brain silently recognizing patterns from past experiences faster than your logical mind can explain them. Something feels wrong before you know why, and that feeling can become terrifyingly accurate. What makes this unsettling is how subtle these signals usually are. A certain tone in someone's voice, a forced smile, a slight change in behavior, the energy in a room shifting without obvious reason. Consciously, your mind may not fully process these details, but subconsciously, your brain is comparing them to thousands of previous experiences, memories, disappointments, betrayals, and emotional patterns stored deep beneath awareness. The human nervous system is designed for survival, not comfort. It constantly scans for familiar signs of danger based on what you have already lived through. This is why people who experienced manipulation often sense dishonesty quickly. People who endured betrayal become highly sensitive to inconsistency. Trauma, heartbreak, rejection, and painful experiences train the brain to detect patterns before logic fully organizes the evidence into words. What makes this psychologically disturbing is that many people ignore these internal warnings because they cannot immediately justify them rationally. They stay in dangerous situations, trust the wrong people, or silence their instincts simply because they fear appearing irrational or paranoid. The frightening truth is that your mind often notices reality emotionally before it can explain reality intellectually. Sometimes your gut feeling is not fear at all. It is hidden experience recognizing danger before your conscious mind fully understands what it sees. Many people confuse attention with love. One of the saddest psychological illusions in human relationships is how easily attention can feel like love. When someone constantly texts you, compliments you, watches your stories, calls you late at night, or makes you feel emotionally noticed, the brain often interprets that attention as genuine care. But attention and love are not the same thing. Attention can be temporary, selfish, manipulative, or driven by boredom, loneliness, ego, or emotional convenience. What makes this confusion so dangerous is that human beings are emotionally wired to crave recognition. Feeling seen activates powerful emotional responses inside the brain. For people who feel lonely, insecure, emotionally neglected, or starved for connection, even inconsistent attention can feel intoxicating. They begin attaching emotionally to the feeling of being noticed rather than the reality of being valued. This is why some people stay trapped in painful situationships, toxic relationships, or emotionally one-sided connections for years. They mistake intensity for care. A person gives them attention only when convenient, disappears without explanation, returns when lonely, and repeats the cycle again and again. Yet the emotional highs created by occasional validation become addictive enough to keep hope alive. The disturbing part is that attention often imitates the surface appearance of love without carrying the responsibility, sacrifice, consistency, or emotional safety real love requires. Someone can crave your presence, desire your validation, or enjoy your emotional energy while having no genuine intention of protecting your heart. Over time, many people realize they were never truly loved. They were simply emotionally useful, entertaining, comforting, attractive, or available during someone else's loneliness. And that realization can feel devastating because attention is loud, immediate, and exciting, while real love is often quieter, steadier, and far more difficult to recognize at first. One selfish decision can erase years of trust. One of the most frightening truths about human relationships is how fragile trust truly is. People often imagine trust as something permanent once it has been built over time, but in reality, trust behaves more like glass than stone. It can take years of loyalty, honesty, consistency, and emotional safety to create, yet a single selfish decision can shatter it in seconds. What makes this reality so emotionally disturbing is that destruction usually happens quietly and unexpectedly. One lie, one betrayal, one act of disloyalty during a vulnerable moment, one selfish choice made for temporary pleasure, pride, greed, or convenience. The relationship may survive physically afterward, but emotionally, something fundamental changes forever. Once someone sees a side of you capable of betraying their trust, they can never fully return to the innocent version of you they believed existed before. The human mind is wired to remember emotional pain tied to betrayal very intensely because trust is deeply connected to psychological safety. When someone breaks that safety, the damage spreads far beyond the single event itself. Suddenly, old memories become suspicious, past words lose meaning, even moments that once felt genuine begin feeling contaminated by doubt. The betrayal rewrites the emotional history of the relationship. The terrifying part is that selfish decisions are often made in moments people assume will pass quickly. They think the truth can stay hidden, the consequences can be managed, or forgiveness will eventually restore everything back to normal. But trust rarely returns in its original form after betrayal. Even if forgiveness happens, emotional certainty often dies quietly underneath it. This is why some people spend years regretting one impulsive decision that permanently altered how another human being sees them forever. The life you want usually requires becoming someone unfamiliar. One of the most uncomfortable truths about growth is that the future you dream about often cannot be reached by remaining the exact person you are right now. People fantasize about success, peace, confidence, love, discipline, or freedom, but they secretly hope they can achieve those things while keeping the same habits, mindset, emotional patterns, and comfort zones that kept them stuck in the first place. Real transformation does not simply change your circumstances, it changes your identity. What makes this so terrifying is that growth often feels like losing yourself before finding yourself. The familiar version of you was built through routines, fears, coping mechanisms, relationships, and environments that once felt emotionally safe. Even unhealthy patterns can become comforting simply because they are known. This is why people often sabotage change. A new version of yourself feels unfamiliar, and the human brain naturally fears unfamiliarity, even when it leads to something better. Someone trying to build discipline must become unfamiliar with constant procrastination. Someone healing emotionally must become unfamiliar with chaos and emotional dependence. A person chasing success often has to outgrow old environments, old mindsets, and sometimes even old relationships that only supported their smaller version. The disturbing part is that transformation can feel lonely because the people around you may not recognize the new person you are becoming. Some will resist your growth because your change forces them to confront their own lack of change. Others will miss the version of you that was easier to control, easier to predict, or emotionally smaller. The life you want often exists on the other side of discomfort, uncertainty, and identity change, and many people remain trapped not because change is impossible, but because becoming unfamiliar feels psychologically terrifying. Most people do not listen to understand. They listen to defend themselves. One of the most unsettling truths about human communication is that many conversations are not actually conversations at all. They are silent battles between two people waiting for their turn to protect their ego. While one person is speaking, the other is often not truly listening with curiosity or empathy. Instead, they are mentally preparing counter-arguments, excuses, justifications, or emotional defenses before the sentence even finishes. What makes this disturbing is how invisible it feels during everyday interactions. You may pour your heart out to someone, explain your pain clearly, or try to communicate honestly, yet somehow leave the conversation feeling completely unheard. That happens because many people interpret words through the lens of self-protection rather than understanding. The moment they feel criticized, challenged, exposed, or emotionally uncomfortable, their brain shifts from listening mode into defense mode. The human ego is deeply fragile. Admitting fault, misunderstanding, selfishness, or emotional immaturity threatens a person's self-image, so the mind instinctively searches for ways to escape discomfort. Instead of absorbing what is being said, people interrupt, explain themselves too quickly, twist meanings, or focus only on defending their intentions rather than understanding the impact of their behavior. What makes this emotionally exhausting is that genuine understanding becomes rare. Many arguments continue for years, not because solutions are impossible, but because neither person feels emotionally safe enough to stop defending themselves long enough to truly listen. The frightening part is realizing how many relationships slowly decay from accumulated misunderstanding. People spend years talking to each other while never truly feeling seen, heard, or emotionally understood because both sides are too busy protecting themselves to genuinely connect. You can be surrounded by people and still emotionally disappear. One of the loneliest experiences a human being can endure is realizing that physical presence does not guarantee emotional connection. A person can sit in crowded rooms, laugh during conversations, attend family gatherings, answer messages all day, and still feel completely invisible inside. Loneliness is not always the absence of people. Sometimes it is the absence of being truly understood. What makes this so psychologically painful is that emotional isolation often hides behind normal behavior. Many people learn to perform happiness so well that nobody notices they are slowly disappearing internally. They continue showing up, smiling, helping others, and fulfilling responsibilities while quietly feeling detached from everyone around them. Over time, they begin feeling like observers in their own life rather than emotionally connected participants. The human mind craves more than interaction. It craves recognition, safety, vulnerability, and genuine understanding. Without those things, relationships can start feeling emotionally empty no matter how many people surround you physically. conversations become shallow, emotions stay hidden, real thoughts remain unspoken. A person slowly becomes emotionally invisible while everyone assumes they are fine. The disturbing part is that emotional disappearance often happens gradually. People stop expressing themselves fully because they feel misunderstood, dismissed, or emotionally unsafe. They begin shrinking parts of their personality to fit social expectations until eventually they no longer recognize how disconnected they have become from themselves. Over time, this creates a terrifying kind of loneliness because it feels impossible to explain. You are not technically alone, yet internally you feel unseen almost everywhere you go. And sometimes the hardest part is realizing that the people around you may genuinely care about you while still never truly seeing the pain quietly living behind your silence. The longer you fake happiness, the harder honesty becomes. One of the most psychologically exhausting things a person can do is pretend to be emotionally okay for too long. At first, fake happiness feels temporary and harmless. You smile to avoid uncomfortable questions. You laugh to keep people from worrying. You tell everyone you are fine because explaining the truth feels too heavy, too complicated, or too painful. But over time, pretending slowly becomes a prison that traps you inside a version of yourself that no longer feels real. What makes this so disturbing is how quickly people begin accepting the performance as your actual identity. The more consistently you fake happiness, the more others believe you are emotionally stable. They stop checking on you deeply. They assume you are strong, coping well, or handling life better than you truly are. Meanwhile, the gap between your public personality and your private emotional reality keeps growing wider. The human mind was never designed to carry emotional dishonesty forever. Suppressed sadness, loneliness, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion do not disappear simply because they are hidden. They build silently underneath the surface. Over time, pretending becomes automatic. You start smiling without feeling it, replying, "I'm good," without thinking, and emotionally disconnecting from your real feelings because honesty itself begins feeling unfamiliar. The frightening part is that eventually you may no longer know how to explain what you truly feel, even when someone genuinely asks. After performing happiness long enough, vulnerability starts feeling dangerous. Admitting pain feels embarrassing. Emotional truth feels like weakness. This is why many deeply unhappy people continue looking perfectly fine on the outside while silently collapsing internally. The longer the performance continues, the harder it becomes to remember how to stop acting and finally tell the truth about what is really happening inside them. Some doors close because you kept knocking too softly. One of the hardest truths about life is realizing that silence, hesitation, and fear can quietly destroy opportunities just as much as failure can. Many people lose chances not because they lacked talent, intelligence, or potential, but because they moved through life too timidly. They waited too long to speak, doubted themselves too much, or approached important moments with uncertainty so visible that the world responded with indifference. What makes this truth painful is that human beings often believe effort alone should be enough, but the world frequently responds to confidence, clarity, and boldness more than hidden capability. A person may have brilliant ideas, yet never speak during the meeting. Someone may deeply love another person, yet never confess their feelings until it is too late. Others spend years hoping someone notices their value while never fully presenting themselves to be seen. Fear of rejection creates quiet people who slowly disappear inside missed opportunities. They rehearse conversations they never have, imagine futures they never pursue, and wait for permission that never comes. Over time, hesitation becomes a habit powerful enough to shape an entire life. The terrifying part is that life rarely pauses for uncertainty. Opportunities move on, people move on, timing changes. Doors that once stood open eventually close because the world interpreted hesitation as disinterest, weakness, or lack of readiness. Many people later call it bad luck, when, in reality, fear was silently making their decisions for them the entire time. They wanted more from life, but approached it carefully, apologetically, almost as if they were afraid to fully ask for what they desired. Sometimes the tragedy is not that life rejected you. It is that you never truly allowed yourself to knock loudly enough to be heard. People respect boundaries. They know they cannot break. One of the harshest truths about human behavior is that many people do not truly respect boundaries simply because you communicate them. They respect boundaries when they believe there will be real consequences for crossing them. Words alone rarely stop manipulation, disrespect, or repeated behavior. What changes people's behavior is certainty. The moment someone realizes a boundary is firm, consistent, and impossible to negotiate emotionally, their attitude toward you changes immediately. What makes this reality unsettling is how often weak boundaries invite repeated disrespect. A person says they dislike being treated a certain way, yet continues tolerating it every time it happens. Over time, others stop taking the boundary seriously because human beings naturally study behavior more than language. If there are no consequences, many people unconsciously interpret the boundary as optional. This is why some individuals continue crossing lines until they finally meet resistance that cannot be manipulated through guilt, charm, anger, or emotional pressure. The human mind constantly tests limits, especially when power, convenience, or personal benefit is involved. Some people push boundaries not because they hate you, but because experience taught them they can. What makes this emotionally painful is that enforcing boundaries often changes relationships. The moment you stop tolerating disrespect, certain people become colder, defensive, or distant because your boundaries remove access they once enjoyed. Suddenly, the version of you they were comfortable controlling no longer exists. The terrifying part is realizing how many people only behaved respectfully after discovering they no longer had unlimited access to your patience, time, emotions, or forgiveness. True boundaries are not built through explanations alone. They are built through repeated action strong enough to convince others that crossing the line will cost them something real. Your future depends more on your daily routine than your biggest goals. One of the most uncomfortable truths about success is that your life is usually shaped by what you repeatedly do, not by what you passionately want. People often become emotionally attached to huge goals, powerful visions, and exciting future versions of themselves, yet completely underestimate the quiet power of their daily habits. The future is rarely built in dramatic moments. It is built inside ordinary routines, repeated over and over again. What makes this so psychologically disturbing is that routines feel insignificant while they are happening. Waking up late one day feels harmless. Skipping practice once seems small. Delaying work for another hour appears temporary. But the human brain slowly adapts to repeated behavior until those small actions harden into identity. Over time, your routines quietly become evidence of what you truly prioritize, regardless of what your goals claim to be. This is why many people stay trapped between ambition and reality. They dream about discipline while practicing inconsistency daily. They imagine success while feeding habits that create failure. The mind loves fantasies because fantasies feel emotionally rewarding without requiring discomfort. Routines, however, expose the truth. They reveal whether someone is genuinely building the future they talk about or simply emotionally attached to the idea of it. The frightening part is that routines compound slowly enough to remain invisible at first. Months pass without obvious consequences. Then years suddenly reveal the results all at once. Confidence weakens. Opportunities disappear. Potential fades. Meanwhile, someone with average talent but powerful routines quietly surpasses people who relied only on motivation and dreams. Eventually, life forces a brutal realization. Goals inspire people temporarily, but routines are what permanently shape who they become. Childhood wounds quietly choose many adult relationships. One of the most unsettling truths about human psychology is that many adult relationships are not chosen as consciously as people believe. Beneath attraction, chemistry, and emotional connection, childhood experiences often operate silently in the background, shaping who feels familiar, who feels safe, and who feels emotionally irresistible. Without realizing it, many people spend adulthood searching for relationships that replay emotional patterns they first experienced as children. What makes this reality so disturbing is that familiarity is often mistaken for love. A person raised around emotional inconsistency may feel intensely drawn to unpredictable partners because chaos feels emotionally normal to them. Someone who grew up constantly seeking approval may become addicted to emotionally distant people, endlessly trying to earn the affection they lacked earlier in life. Even painful treatment can feel strangely comforting when the nervous system learned to associate love with instability, criticism, neglect, or emotional unpredictability. The human brain naturally seeks patterns it already understands, even unhealthy ones. Childhood wounds do not simply disappear with age. They quietly influence attachment styles, emotional reactions, fears of abandonment, trust issues, and the type of people someone repeatedly allows into their life. Many adults unknowingly recreate emotional environments that mirror unresolved pain because the mind confuses familiar suffering with emotional safety. The frightening part is that people often blame themselves for repeated heartbreak without recognizing the deeper psychological pattern controlling their choices. They believe they are simply unlucky in love, while old emotional wounds continue pulling them toward relationships that reopen the same pain again and again. This is why healing becomes so important. Until unresolved childhood pain is confronted consciously, the past quietly keeps choosing people for you while you mistake those choices for destiny, chemistry, or love. Sometimes you are the toxic pattern in your own life. One of the most uncomfortable realizations a person can experience is discovering that not every problem in their life was caused by other people. Sometimes the chaos, heartbreak, failed relationships, repeated disappointments, and emotional exhaustion keep appearing because the common pattern connecting all of them is you. This truth is difficult to accept because the human mind naturally protects itself from guilt. It is far easier to blame circumstances, bad luck, or toxic people than to confront the possibility that your own behaviors may also be creating destruction. What makes this realization so disturbing is that toxic patterns often feel normal to the person repeating them. Someone raised around manipulation may unknowingly manipulate others. A person terrified of abandonment may become controlling without realizing it. Someone deeply insecure may constantly seek validation, sabotage relationships, overreact emotionally, or push away the very people trying to love them. Pain that remains unhealed quietly spreads into other people's lives. Human beings are experts at noticing the flaws of others while remaining blind to their own repeated behaviors. This is why some people experience the same type of conflict in every friendship, every relationship, or every environment they enter. Different faces, different places, but the emotional outcome remains strangely familiar. The terrifying part is that self-destruction rarely announces itself clearly. It hides behind excuses, emotional reactions, defense mechanisms, pride, and unconscious habits developed years earlier. People often believe they are protecting themselves while unknowingly damaging their own happiness repeatedly. Growth becomes truly painful the moment someone stops asking, "Why does this keep happening to me?" and starts asking, "What part of me keeps recreating this pattern?" Because sometimes the hardest person to confront is not the people who hurt you, but the version of yourself contributing to the cycle. Many people never apologize because admitting guilt threatens their identity. One of the most disturbing realities about human psychology is that some people would rather destroy relationships than admit they were wrong. To an emotionally immature mind, apologizing does not feel like accountability. It feels like humiliation, weakness, or personal defeat. The moment guilt threatens the image they have built of themselves, the brain instinctively shifts into self-protection mode, even when the evidence is obvious. What makes this so painful is that many people are fully aware they caused harm, yet still refuse to acknowledge it openly. Instead of apologizing, they minimize the situation, change the subject, blame circumstances, attack your reaction, or rewrite the story entirely. The apology never comes because admitting fault would force them to confront parts of themselves they desperately avoid seeing. The human ego is deeply attached to identity. A person who views themselves as good, strong, right, or superior may experience intense psychological discomfort when faced with evidence that contradicts that self-image. Rather than accepting guilt and growing from it, some people unconsciously protect their identity at all costs. Denial becomes emotionally easier than self-reflection. What makes this emotionally exhausting is that victims often spend years waiting for closure that never arrives. They replay conversations in their head, hoping the other person will eventually understand the damage they caused. But many people are not avoiding the apology because they forgot. They are avoiding it because accountability threatens the version of themselves they cannot emotionally afford to lose. The terrifying truth is that pride can become stronger than love, empathy, or honesty. And once protecting the ego becomes someone's highest priority, genuine apology starts feeling more dangerous to them than the pain they caused another human being. You become easier to manipulate when you fear losing people. One of the darkest psychological weaknesses a person can develop is the fear of abandonment. The moment you become terrified of losing someone, your ability to think clearly around them begins to weaken. Fear changes behavior. It makes people tolerate disrespect, ignore red flags, betray their own boundaries, and accept emotional treatment they would normally never allow. The deeper the fear of losing someone becomes, the easier it becomes for that person to control you consciously or unconsciously. What makes this so dangerous is that manipulation rarely begins with obvious control. It often starts subtly. You become overly careful with your words. You apologize even when you are not wrong. You suppress your needs to avoid conflict. You constantly monitor the other person's mood, trying to prevent rejection or distance. Over time, your emotional stability slowly becomes dependent on their approval, attention, or presence. The human brain naturally seeks attachment and emotional security. When someone becomes emotionally important to us, losing them can feel psychologically threatening. Manipulative people often sense this fear quickly. Some use silence, withdrawal, guilt, inconsistency, or emotional hot and cold behavior to strengthen control without directly saying it. The more anxious you become about losing them, the more power they quietly gain over your emotions. The disturbing part is that fear of abandonment often disguises itself as love. People convince themselves they are simply loyal, patient, or deeply caring, while secretly abandoning their own dignity to keep someone close. They remain trapped in unhealthy situations because the pain of being alone feels more terrifying than the pain of staying controlled. Over time, this fear slowly erodes self-respect, and many people do not realize how manipulated they became until they finally stop fearing the loss of people who were using that fear against them. Nobody talks about how success can isolate you. One of the loneliest truths about success is that people constantly talk about the rewards while rarely mentioning the emotional distance it can create. From the outside, success looks exciting, powerful, and fulfilling. People imagine admiration, freedom, recognition, and opportunity, but what they do not see is how success quietly changes relationships, conversations, and the way people emotionally respond to you. What makes this reality so unsettling is that isolation often arrives gradually. At first, people celebrate your growth. They encourage your ambition and admire your discipline. But as your life begins changing, certain relationships slowly become uncomfortable. Some people start comparing themselves to you. Others assume you no longer relate to them. Jealousy appears where support once existed. Conversations become less genuine because people either resent your progress, expect something from you, or secretly wait for you to fail. The frightening part is that success often forces emotional separation from environments that once felt familiar. Your routines change, your priorities change, your mindset changes. Things that once entertained you no longer feel meaningful. Slowly, you realize you cannot fully return to the version of yourself that fit comfortably into your old life. Even when surrounded by people, a strange emotional distance begins forming inside you. Many successful people quietly struggle with trust because they no longer know who genuinely cares about them and who simply cares about the benefits attached to their success. Compliments start feeling suspicious. Loyalty becomes harder to measure. Even love can feel uncertain when people treat your achievements as part of your value. The disturbing truth is that growth sometimes costs familiarity, and while success can improve your lifestyle dramatically, it can also leave you emotionally standing in rooms full of people who no longer truly understand who you became. Time does not heal everything. Some things heal only when confronted. One of the biggest lies people tell themselves is that time alone will eventually erase pain. They believe if they wait long enough, stay distracted long enough, or keep moving forward long enough, the wound will somehow disappear on its own. But many emotional scars do not fade simply because years pass. Some pain quietly survives in the background, shaping behavior, relationships, fears, and identity, until it is finally confronted directly. What makes this truth so disturbing is how easy avoidance can feel at first. People bury heartbreak inside work, suppress trauma through distraction, and hide emotional wounds behind humor, productivity, or emotional numbness. Outwardly, life appears normal. They continue functioning, smiling, and surviving, but internally, unresolved pain often waits silently beneath the surface, influencing reactions in ways they barely understand. Someone betrayed years ago may still struggle trusting people. A person humiliated in childhood may still fear rejection decades later. Someone who never processed grief may suddenly break emotionally over something small because the pain never actually left. It only remained hidden. The terrifying part is that time can sometimes deepen wounds instead of healing them. The longer pain stays unaddressed, the more it hardens into personality, defense mechanisms, and emotional habits. Avoidance slowly transforms temporary pain into permanent emotional patterns. Human beings often mistake distraction for healing because both can temporarily reduce discomfort. But real healing usually requires something far more uncomfortable: honesty, facing the memory, having the conversation, acknowledging the trauma, feeling emotions that were buried for years. Some wounds stay alive precisely because they were never truly faced, and many people spend their entire lives running from pain that could have started healing the moment they finally turned around and confronted it directly. The people who say, "Money does not matter," usually have enough of it. One of the most uncomfortable truths about life is that people often underestimate the importance of money only after they no longer fear living without it. Someone with stable income, food in the fridge, a safe home, medical access, and financial security can easily speak about how money is not everything. But to a person drowning in bills, skipping meals, struggling with survival, or losing sleep over rent, money does not feel like luxury. It feels like oxygen. What makes this reality disturbing is how disconnected financial comfort can make people from the psychological weight of scarcity. Poverty changes the human mind in ways many comfortable people never fully understand. Constant financial stress affects sleep, confidence, relationships, decision-making, mental health, and even physical health. The brain becomes trapped in survival mode, where every unexpected expense feels like a threat rather than an inconvenience. This is why advice about happiness sometimes sounds painfully empty to people who are struggling financially. It is difficult to focus on passion, peace, self-discovery, or emotional healing when basic stability is constantly under attack. Money may not guarantee happiness, but lack of money can absolutely generate chronic fear, exhaustion, humiliation, and emotional despair. What makes this emotionally complicated is that wealthy or comfortable people are not always wrong when they say money cannot solve everything. Emotional emptiness, loneliness, betrayal, and suffering still exist at every financial level, but financial stability removes entire categories of stress that quietly destroy millions of people every day. The frightening truth is that money becomes unimportant most easily to those who no longer wake up terrified about surviving without it. Some people are addicted to being rescued. One of the most emotionally confusing realities in human relationships is that not everyone truly wants to heal. Some people become psychologically attached to being saved, comforted, chased, or emotionally carried by others. Over time, their identity begins revolving around crisis, helplessness, or struggle because being rescued gives them attention, validation, sympathy, and emotional security they do not know how to create on their own. What makes this so dangerous is that rescuing people can feel like love at first. You feel needed, important, protective. You constantly solve their problems, calm their emotions, fix their mistakes, and sacrifice your energy to keep them stable. But slowly, a disturbing pattern begins to appear. Every time things improve, another crisis emerges. Every solution creates a new problem. Progress never fully lasts because chaos has quietly become part of their emotional identity. The human mind can become addicted to emotional dependency without realizing it. Some people unconsciously fear becoming emotionally independent because independence removes the constant care, reassurance, and attention they receive during struggle. Remaining broken keeps relationships centered around them. It guarantees emotional focus. It keeps others emotionally attached through guilt, concern, or responsibility. The terrifying part is that rescuers often destroy themselves trying to save people who subconsciously resist being saved. They mistake emotional dependency for deep connection and exhaustion for loyalty. Meanwhile, the cycle continues endlessly because the other person is emotionally invested in remaining the one who always needs rescuing. Over time, this dynamic becomes emotionally draining for everyone involved. The rescuer slowly loses peace, while the person being rescued never fully develops the strength to stand on their own. And eventually, both people become trapped inside a relationship built more on emotional dependency than genuine growth. A peaceful life can feel boring after years of emotional chaos. One of the strangest psychological effects of prolonged emotional chaos is that peace can eventually start feeling unfamiliar, uncomfortable, and even empty. After spending years surrounded by drama, instability, conflict, anxiety, toxic relationships, or constant emotional highs and lows, the human nervous system slowly adapts to chaos as its normal state. When calmness finally arrives, many people do not immediately feel relief. They feel restless. What makes this reality so disturbing is that emotional chaos changes the brain's relationship with stimulation. Constant stress keeps the mind emotionally alert, always waiting for the next argument, disappointment, crisis, or emotional reaction. Over time, the body becomes addicted to intensity without realizing it. The unpredictability creates emotional spikes that the nervous system begins expecting daily. When those spikes disappear, silence suddenly feels unnatural. This is why some people unknowingly sabotage healthy relationships, stable routines, or peaceful environments. Calm conversations feel too quiet. Healthy love feels less exciting. Stability feels emotionally flat compared to the roller coaster they became used to surviving. Without realizing it, they mistake emotional exhaustion for passion and chaos for connection because peace does not trigger the same intense emotional reactions their nervous system learned to crave. The frightening part is that healing itself can feel emotionally uncomfortable at first. Sitting in a peaceful room with no conflict to manage can force people to finally face emotions they spent years distracting themselves from through chaos. Silence exposes unresolved pain that constant drama once kept hidden. This is why some people repeatedly return to toxic situations even after escaping them. Not because suffering feels good, but because after years of emotional survival, peace can feel terrifyingly unfamiliar to a mind that no longer remembers how safety is supposed to feel. The hardest thing to accept is that some people simply did not love you deeply. One of the most painful realizations a person can experience is understanding that not everyone loved them with the same depth, sincerity, or emotional intensity they gave in return. Many people spend years trying to explain away someone's lack of effort, emotional distance, inconsistency, or coldness because accepting the truth feels unbearable. They convince themselves the person was confused, busy, stressed, emotionally damaged, or afraid of vulnerability. But sometimes the painful reality is much simpler. The love was never as deep as they hoped it was. What makes this truth so heartbreaking is that human beings naturally project their own emotions onto others. If you love deeply, sacrifice deeply, and stay emotionally loyal, you unconsciously assume the other person feels things with the same intensity. You interpret mixed signals as hidden love. You defend people who repeatedly hurt you because your heart keeps searching for proof that the connection mattered equally to them. The terrifying part is how long people can stay trapped inside denial. They replay memories, analyze conversations, and hold on to tiny moments of affection because letting go means confronting a devastating emotional imbalance. Realizing someone did not value you the way you valued them can feel like grieving both the relationship and the illusion you built around it. Human beings often struggle more with emotional indifference than rejection itself. Rejection at least acknowledges significance, but indifference creates a deeper wound because it forces someone to confront the possibility that the connection meant far more to them than it ever did to the other person. Some people were attached to your presence, your comfort, your loyalty, or what you provided, but deep love reveals itself through consistency, effort, protection, emotional honesty, and genuine care when it matters most. Being right can still ruin your life if you say it recklessly. One of the most dangerous mistakes intelligent people make is believing that truth alone protects them from consequences. They assume that if they are factually correct, their words cannot damage relationships, opportunities, or their own future. But human beings are emotional creatures before they are logical ones. The way truth is delivered often matters just as much as the truth itself. What makes this reality disturbing is that being technically right can still create emotional destruction when delivered without wisdom, timing, or restraint. A harsh truth spoken publicly can humiliate someone permanently. Correct criticism delivered with arrogance can trigger resentment instead of growth. Even honesty can become cruelty when it is used carelessly, aggressively, or without empathy. The human ego reacts strongly to shame and disrespect. Once people feel attacked, exposed, or emotionally cornered, they often stop listening entirely. Instead of hearing the truth, they focus on protecting themselves from the emotional pain of how it was delivered. This is why reckless honesty frequently creates enemies faster than understanding. What makes this especially dangerous is that many people use "I'm just being honest" to justify emotional impulsiveness, lack of self-control, or hidden anger. They confuse bluntness with strength and cruelty with authenticity. Over time, this damages trust, isolates relationships, and creates unnecessary conflict, even when the original point was valid. The frightening truth is that wisdom is not merely knowing what is true. Wisdom is understanding when, how, and whether the truth should be spoken at all. A person who cannot control the delivery of truth often ends up destroying connections, opportunities, and peace while still technically being correct. Most self-sabotage feels reasonable while you are doing it. One of the most dangerous things about self-sabotage is that it rarely feels destructive in the moment. It usually feels logical, comforting, protective, or justified. People rarely wake up intending to ruin their own progress. Instead, they slowly convince themselves that avoiding risks, delaying action, staying comfortable, or giving up for now is the smart decision. This is why self-sabotage is so difficult to recognize while it is actively shaping your life. What makes this psychologically terrifying is how convincing the mind becomes when protecting itself from discomfort. Fear disguises itself as caution. Insecurity disguises itself as perfectionism. Laziness disguises itself as exhaustion. Avoidance disguises itself as waiting for the right time. The brain creates believable explanations that protect you from immediate emotional pain while quietly damaging your future in the background. This is why many people repeatedly destroy opportunities without fully understanding why. They procrastinate on goals they deeply care about. They push away healthy relationships. They quit when progress becomes uncomfortable. They stay silent when opportunities appear. In the moment, every decision feels emotionally understandable, but over time, the pattern slowly reveals itself. The disturbing part is that self-sabotage often comes from hidden beliefs a person never consciously confronted. Deep down, some people fear success because success creates pressure. Others fear rejection so intensely that avoiding action feels safer than risking failure. Some secretly believe they are undeserving of happiness, love, or achievement, so they unconsciously create behaviors that confirm those beliefs. Years later, many people look back shocked at how often they stood in the way of their own growth, not because they wanted pain, but because protecting themselves emotionally felt more reasonable than confronting the discomfort required to change. You can lose yourself trying to avoid disappointing others. One of the saddest truths about human behavior is how easily people abandon themselves in exchange for approval. At first, it feels harmless. You say yes when you want to say no. You stay quiet to avoid conflict. You adjust your personality, your dreams, your opinions, and even your boundaries just to keep others comfortable. Slowly, pleasing people starts feeling safer than being honest about who you really are. What makes this emotionally dangerous is that the process happens gradually. Nobody notices the moment they begin disappearing inside other people's expectations. It starts with small sacrifices made out of love, guilt, fear, or loyalty. Over time, those sacrifices become habits. You stop asking yourself what you actually want because your entire emotional focus becomes centered on avoiding disappointment, rejection, or criticism from others. The human mind naturally fears social disapproval because acceptance has always been tied to emotional survival. This is why many people become addicted to being needed, useful, agreeable, or emotionally available at all times. They believe maintaining harmony is worth any personal cost, but eventually, constantly performing for others creates emotional exhaustion that becomes impossible to ignore. The frightening part is that people who spend years prioritizing everyone else often wake up feeling deeply disconnected from themselves. They no longer recognize their own desires, values, personality, or goals because so much of their identity was shaped around managing other people's emotions. Even making simple personal decisions begins feeling uncomfortable because they were trained to seek permission emotionally before choosing anything for themselves. This is why some people secretly feel empty despite being loved by everyone around them. They built relationships around pleasing others so consistently that somewhere along the way, they slowly abandoned the person they originally were before the performance began. 1 year of discipline can completely embarrass your last 5 years. One of the most shocking truths about personal growth is how quickly life can transform once discipline replaces excuses. People often believe change requires decades, perfect timing, or extraordinary talent. But in reality, consistent effort applied daily for a single year can create results so dramatic that it makes previous years of procrastination feel painful to look back on. What once seemed impossible suddenly becomes evidence of how much time was lost to hesitation, distraction, and lack of structure. What makes this realization so unsettling is that many people are not actually incapable of changing their life. They are trapped in cycles of inconsistency. They wait for motivation instead of building routines. They rely on emotion instead of systems. One day they feel inspired and work hard, then disappear for weeks the moment discomfort returns. Over time, years quietly vanish inside unfinished goals, abandoned plans, and repeated promises to start tomorrow. Discipline changes this completely because it removes negotiation with your emotions. You continue showing up even when tired, bored, discouraged, or unmotivated. Small actions repeated daily begin compounding silently beneath the surface. Reading every day, training every day, writing every day, saving money every day, improving a skill every day. At first, the progress feels invisible, which is why most people quit too early. The terrifying part is realizing how much potential can be unlocked once someone becomes consistent for long enough. A single disciplined year can improve your body, mindset, finances, confidence, skills, and opportunities so dramatically that your old self starts feeling unrecognizable. Many people spend 5 years waiting for the perfect mood to change their life, while another person quietly transforms everything within 12 months simply because they stopped depending on motivation and started depending on discipline instead. People often reveal their true character when you stop benefiting them. One of the most painful truths about human relationships is that some people only treat you well while receiving something from you, as long as you provide attention, usefulness, emotional support, money, loyalty, opportunities, validation, or convenience. The relationship feels warm and stable. But the moment your value to them decreases, something unsettling begins to surface. Their patience shortens, their kindness fades, their effort disappears. Suddenly, the person you trusted starts feeling emotionally unfamiliar. What makes this reality so disturbing is how convincing conditional loyalty can appear in the beginning. People often mistake access for affection and usefulness for love. When someone constantly calls, checks on you, or keeps you close, it naturally feels genuine. But true character is rarely revealed during periods of benefit. It is revealed when maintaining the relationship no longer serves someone's personal interests. The human ego naturally gravitates towards self-interest, and not everyone has the emotional maturity to care for people without personal gain attached. Some individuals unconsciously build relationships around utility rather than connection. They stay loyal, while the emotional, financial, or social rewards remain active. Once those rewards disappear, so does the energy they once gave effortlessly. What makes this emotionally devastating is that many people only discover the truth during vulnerable moments. Illness, failure, financial hardship, emotional burnout, or personal growth often expose who genuinely values you and who only valued what you provided. The frightening part is realizing how quickly certain people change once they no longer need something from you. Their respect was never rooted in your humanity. It was rooted in your usefulness. And when the benefit disappears, the mask often disappears with it. The life you envy may secretly exhaust the person living it. One of the most deceptive things about human perception is how easily people romanticize lives they do not fully understand. From a distance, someone else's life can appear perfect. Success, beauty, money, relationships, popularity, freedom, admiration. You compare your struggles to their highlights and quietly convince yourself they must be happier, luckier, or more fulfilled than you. But what people display publicly is often only the part they can emotionally survive showing others. What makes this truth so unsettling is that exhaustion frequently hides behind the lives people envy most. The successful person may be drowning under pressure nobody sees. The beautiful person may secretly hate themselves. The wealthy person may feel emotionally isolated and constantly suspicious of others' intentions. The person with endless attention may privately feel trapped by expectations they can no longer escape. Human beings naturally compare their private pain to other people's public image, which creates dangerous illusions. You see vacations, but not loneliness, achievement, but not burnout, relationships, but not emotional emptiness, smiles, but not panic attacks at night. The mind fills missing details with fantasy because it wants to believe someone else escaped the struggles it cannot escape itself. The frightening part is that envy often blinds people to the hidden cost attached to certain lifestyles. Some lives require sacrificing peace, privacy, sleep, authenticity, relationships, or mental stability just to maintain the image others admire from the outside. What appears glamorous externally may feel emotionally suffocating internally. This is why appearances can become psychologically misleading. Many people spend years chasing lives they think would finally make them happy, only to discover the person already living that reality is secretly exhausted, emotionally numb, or desperately trying to escape the very life others are busy envying. You can spend years chasing validation from people incapable of giving it. One of the most emotionally draining mistakes people make is spending years trying to earn approval, love, or recognition from individuals who were never truly capable of giving it in the first place. Some people keep chasing validation from emotionally unavailable parents, distant partners, cold friends, or people who are too damaged, insecure, selfish, or emotionally disconnected to offer the reassurance being desperately sought. The painful part is that the harder someone tries, the deeper the emotional exhaustion becomes. What makes this truth so heartbreaking is that human beings naturally crave closure and acknowledgement from the people who affected them most. A child ignored emotionally may spend adulthood trying to become good enough for a parent who never learned how to express love properly. Someone rejected in a relationship may keep over-explaining, over-giving, or over-sacrificing, hoping the other person will finally recognize their worth. But some people cannot provide emotional validation because they do not even possess emotional clarity within themselves. The terrifying part is that chasing unavailable validation slowly destroys self-worth. Your confidence becomes dependent on reactions you cannot control. Every cold response feels personal. Every moment of indifference feels like proof you are unworthy. Over time, people begin abandoning themselves emotionally while trying to win approval from someone emotionally incapable of giving genuine acceptance. Human beings often stay trapped in these cycles because they confuse persistence with love. They believe if they just try harder, become better, or sacrifice more, the validation will finally come. But emotional unavailability cannot always be fixed through effort. Some people will never fully see your value because they are emotionally unequipped to recognize it. And one of the hardest lessons in life is realizing that peace begins the moment you stop begging emotionally unavailable people to confirm your worth.